Welcome to Luke's Stories, where camping isn't all about campfires and stars, but also nightmares in the dark. My name is David Dudley, and I'm 40 years old. This happened in late February, deep in the swamps of Big Cypress National Preserve in Florida. I'd driven my RV into the wilderness looking for isolation and a chance to test my survival skills. I didn't go there for the peace or the beauty. I went to prove that I could live off the land, just me against nature. What I found instead wasn't nature. It was something darker, something I still can't fully explain. I arrived at Big Cypress early in the morning, the mist still clinging to the trees. My RV rattled over the rough dirt road, bouncing with every pothole. I finally found a clearing near the edge of the swamp, shaded by towering cypress trees draped in Spanish moss. It was perfect, remote, quiet, and miles away from the nearest person. I parked, unloaded my gear, and set up camp. My plan was simple: spend 2 weeks out here, relying on my skills and instincts. I had basic supplies, some canned food, a water filter, and a few tools, but I wanted to rely mostly on what I could catch or forage. I wasn't worried. I'd done this before. By late afternoon, the swamp came alive. Birds called from the trees, frogs croaked in the distance, and the faint hum of insects filled the air. It felt like stepping into another world. But as I finished setting up camp, I noticed something odd: large hoof prints in the soft mud near my RV. They were too big to be from a deer and too deep to belong to a boar. I stared at them for a while, then shrugged it off. Big Cypress was home to all sorts of animals, and I figured it was nothing to worry about. That night, the swamp was eerily quiet. I sat by my campfire, jotting notes in my journal about the day. I was about to turn in when I heard it, a deep, resonant sound like the rumble of a distant drum. It came from somewhere in the swamp, low and rhythmic. I froze, straining to listen, but the sound faded as quickly as it had started. I told myself it was just the wind or the creak of trees shifting in the breeze. I didn't want to admit it, but it left me uneasy. When I crawled into bed, I locked the RV door. I don't usually do that. There's nothing out here that I can't handle. But that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next few days were more unsettling. On the second morning, I noticed that some of my supplies were missing: a few cans of food, a small hatchet, and my fishing line. I knew I hadn't misplaced them, and there was no sign of anyone else nearby. But the hoof prints were back, this time circling the RV. They were deeper now, like something heavy had been pacing around my camp. The swamp itself seemed different too. The birds that had been so noisy on the first day were silent, and the air felt heavier, more oppressive. I kept brushing off the feeling of being watched, but it was getting harder to ignore. On the fourth night, I heard the sound again, the drumming, louder this time and closer. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The fire had burned down to embers, casting long shadows across the trees. I scanned the swamp but saw nothing. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement, a flash of something tall and dark disappearing into the trees. "Who's there?" I called, my voice steadier than I felt. No answer, just the faint rustle of leaves. I stood there for what felt like an eternity before retreating to the RV and locking the door again. The next day I went deeper into the swamp, determined to find answers. I followed the hoof prints, which led me to a clearing I hadn't seen before. In the center stood a crumbling stone altar, half buried in the muck. It was adorned with animal bones, skulls, ribs, antlers, all arranged in a way that felt deliberate. The carvings on the altar were faded but intricate, depicting swirling shapes that seemed to shift if I stared too long. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I wasn't superstitious, but something about this place felt wrong. I backed away, intending to leave, when I noticed fresh hoof prints leading away from the altar. They were impossibly large, almost like they'd been made by some kind of monstrous animal. That night, the black stag appeared. It was just beyond the edge of the firelight, its glowing red eyes piercing the darkness. Its massive antlers seemed to stretch into the night sky, and its dark, sinewy body glistened as if wet. It didn't move, just stared, its presence heavy and suffocating. I don't know how long I sat there frozen. Eventually it turned and melted into the shadows without a sound. That night I dreamed of the black stag. In the dream, it stood at the edge of my campfire, speaking in a voice that was both deep and resonant, like the rumble of thunder. "You've wandered too far," it said, its voice echoing in my head. "This is my domain. You can leave, or you can stay and be consumed." I woke, drenched in sweat. The fire had burned out, and the RV was colder than it had any right to be. When I stepped outside, I found hoofprints circling the camp again, closer this time, almost touching the edge of the fire pit. I decided I had to leave. I packed up what little I could, but when I tried to start the RV, the engine sputtered and died. I checked the battery. It was completely drained, though it had been fully charged the day before. That night, the black stag returned. This time, it stepped into the light of the fire. It was even more terrifying up close, its fur matted and black, its eyes glowing like embers. It towered over me, and when it spoke, its voice echoed through the swamp. "You cannot leave without offering something in return." "What do you want?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Your freedom," it said. I didn't know what that meant, but I wasn't about to give it anything. Instead, I grabbed my lighter and ran to the altar. I doused it in fuel and set it ablaze. The flames roared to life, consuming the bones and carvings. The black stag let out an unearthly roar, its form twisting and writhing before it dissolved into the shadows. The oppressive weight lifted, and for the first time in days, the swamp felt alive again. The next morning, the RV started on the first try. I drove out of Big Cypress as fast as the dirt road would let me, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly they ached. I haven't told anyone about what happened, not fully. Sometimes when I'm alone, I still hear the drumming sound, faint and distant, and when I close my eyes, I see those glowing red eyes watching me from the darkness. My name is Joseph Livingston, and I was 16 when this happened in the summer of 2018. At the time, I thought the worst part of the trip would be being stuck in the middle of nowhere with my family and no Wi-Fi. Turns out I was wrong, so wrong. What happened in Chippewa National Forest wasn't just weird, it was terrifying. It started with Dad's brilliant idea to take us camping. He wanted to reconnect as a family, which meant cramming me, my 7-year-old brother Ethan, and Mom into our RV and heading to the woods. Dad's name is Tom, by the way. He's a former Boy Scout who still believes duct tape and a multi-tool can fix anything. Mom, Sarah, was less enthusiastic about the trip, though she didn't say much. She had this way of pursing her lips when she was worried, and they were tight as piano strings. From the moment we left, we drove hours into the forest, farther than I thought was necessary. It was hot, sticky, and smelled like pine sap and mildew. Eventually we found this clearing off some barely there dirt road. There were no other campers, no ranger station, just trees and silence. Dad clapped his hands. "Perfect spot." I rolled my eyes. "Perfectly creepy, you mean?" "Come on, Joseph," he said. "It's an adventure." Ethan was already bouncing around, excited to explore. That's my little brother, quiet one second, full of energy the next. I helped unpack while Dad fiddled with the generator, which kept sputtering and dying. He muttered something about needing to tinker with it later. That first night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of the crickets or the distant rustling, but because of the weird, heavy feeling in the air. It pressed on me like a weight on my chest. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was just the isolation, right? But then Mom, who was always calm, woke up around midnight and just sat there, staring out the RV window like she was listening for something. The next day, Ethan found the doll. It was mid-morning, and we were setting up a fire pit when Ethan came running out of the woods, holding this small handmade figure. It was a creepy thing, just a few twigs tied together with bits of fabric, but it had this unsettling human shape. "Look what I found," he said, smiling like he'd found treasure. "I'm going to call him Silas." Mom froze. "Where did you find that?" Ethan pointed to the edge of the forest, by the big tree over there. Mom tried to take the doll from him, but Ethan clutched it tightly. "No, Silas is mine," he said. Dad laughed it off. "It's just a doll, Sarah. Let him have his fun." Mom didn't argue, but later, when she thought no one was looking, I saw her burying a similar doll she'd found near the fire pit. I didn't think much of it at the time. That night, things got worse. It started with the noises. Soft laughter, like kids playing, except it was coming from the woods, and it was way past dark. I thought maybe I was dreaming until I saw Mom sit bolt upright. She shook Dad awake. "Tom, listen," she whispered. Dad rubbed his eyes. "It's just animals." "Animals don't laugh," she shot back. I pressed my ear to the RV wall and heard it too, high-pitched giggles and rustling leaves, like someone or something was running just outside. Dad grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside despite Mom's protests. I peeked out the window as he swept the beam around. Nothing. "It's fine. Go back to sleep," he called. But it wasn't fine. The next morning I noticed deep scratches on the RV's side, like claw marks. Dad brushed it off as a raccoon or something, but I wasn't convinced. Neither was Mom. That's when she started telling us about the stories her grandmother used to tell about spirits that lured children into the woods. "They mimic laughter," she said. "Voices. They trick you." Dad scoffed. "You're scaring the kids." But Mom wasn't trying to scare us. She was scared herself. Ethan, on the other hand, didn't seem bothered. He spent the day playing with Silas and humming a strange tune I'd never heard before. When I asked him about it, he just shrugged. "Silas taught it to me." I laughed nervously. "Sure he did." By the third night, I was ready to leave. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The air was too still, too quiet, except for Ethan's humming. He'd been humming that same tune all day, and it was driving me nuts. "Ethan, can you stop?" I snapped. He didn't even look at me. "Silas says we're going to play hide-and-seek tonight, and that gave me chills." "Who's we's?" I asked. "The other kids," he said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Mom shot Dad a look. "We're leaving tomorrow." Dad sighed. "Sarah, it's just a phase. He's using his imagination." "Tom, something isn't right." That night, Ethan disappeared. We had just finished dinner when I realized he wasn't in the RV. I panicked, shouting his name as we searched the campsite. That's when we found the doll, Silas, lying at the forest's edge, smeared with sticky black sap. Mom picked it up, and her hands started trembling. "He's in the woods," she whispered. We grabbed flashlights and ventured in, calling Ethan's name. The trees closed in around us, the air thick with that oppressive heaviness. And then we heard it. The laughter. High-pitched giggles, just ahead. I ran toward it, but Mom yanked me back. "Stay together," she hissed. The laughter grew louder, and we saw them. A ring of pale children standing in a clearing. Their eyes were empty, like they weren't really looking at us. Ethan was standing in the center, holding hands with one of them. The child next to him was skeletal, its body twisted unnaturally, like it had been shaped from wood. "Ethan," Mom cried, stepping forward. The children turned to us in unison, their heads jerking unnaturally. My legs turned to jelly. Ethan didn't react. He just stood there, staring ahead, humming that eerie tune. "Let him go!" Mom shouted. One of the children spoke, but its voice was hollow and wrong, like multiple voices layered together. "He belongs to the forest now." Dad aimed his flashlight at them, and for a moment the light revealed their true forms, decayed, rotting bodies, their skin stretched thin over bones. The skeletal child smiled, its jaw unhinging wider than it should have. I wanted to run, but Mom grabbed my arm. "We're not leaving without him." She knelt, clutching the doll in her hands. "Take this," she whispered. "Take Silas back and let him go." The children didn't move, but their hollow eyes seemed to narrow. "Burn it," I said suddenly, my voice shaking. "Burn the doll." Mom hesitated, but Dad pulled out a lighter and set the doll ablaze. The children screamed, a piercing, otherworldly sound that echoed through the trees. Ethan collapsed, and the children dissolved into the shadows, leaving behind a towering figure at the edge of the clearing, the Wendigo. It was skeletal, with antlers sprouting from its head and glowing, hollow eyes that burned into my soul. It let out a guttural growl and stepped toward us. Dad fired a flare gun, and the creature recoiled, its form flickering like smoke. We didn't wait. Grabbing Ethan, we ran back to the RV and didn't stop until we reached the nearest ranger station. We never saw the Wendigo again, but we didn't need to. It's still out there, waiting. Ethan doesn't talk about what happened. He says he doesn't remember. But sometimes I catch him humming that tune, and every time I feel the weight of the forest pressing down on me. like it's still watching, because I know it is. My name is Austin Thomas, and this happened to me on September 14th, 1998. I had just bought an old RV from a buddy of mine, Sam Parsons. He swore it was a steal, so I took him at his word and set off to explore some quieter parts of Colorado. I figured it was a good excuse to take a break from my job at the warehouse and enjoy a bit of solitude. The RV wasn't fancy, but it had a bed, a small kitchen, and enough space to feel comfortable. The first couple of days were uneventful. I drove through small towns, stopping at diners for coffee and pie, and making idle conversation with the locals. By the third day, I found a secluded spot by a lake near the edge of a dense forest. It was perfect. No cell signal, no other campers, just peace and quiet. I parked the RV, set up a folding chair by the water, and cracked open a beer. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the lake, and I felt a deep sense of calm. This was what I needed. As night fell, I lit a small campfire and cooked up some hot dogs. The crackling fire and the distant hoots of an owl were the only sounds I could hear. It was idyllic. Around midnight, I decided to call it a night. I doused the fire, locked up the RV, and crawled into bed. I slept like a rock until around 3 in the morning, when I was jolted awake by a loud thud against the side of the RV. I sat up, groggy and disoriented, and listened. At first, I thought it might be a bear or a deer, but the thud continued, more rhythmic and deliberate than any animal I had ever encountered. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously stepped outside, shining the beam around the perimeter of the RV. The forest was silent, and there was no sign of anything unusual. I convinced myself it was just the wind or a branch falling from a tree and went back inside. But as soon as I laid down, the thud started again, this time accompanied by a scraping sound, like nails on metal. Heart pounding, I searched the RV for something to defend myself with and settled on a rusty old tire iron I found under the sink. I stepped outside again, circling the RV with the flashlight in one hand and the tire iron in the other. This time I noticed something strange, deep, jagged scratches running along the side of the RV, too high up to have been made by any animal I knew of. I decided then and there to pack up and leave at first light. Dawn couldn't come soon enough. I barely slept, lying in bed with the tire iron at my side, ears straining for any sound. When the first light of morning crept through the windows, I threw on my clothes, fired up the RV, and drove out of there as fast as I could. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I'd been alone too long and was jumping at shadows. I drove for hours, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that had settled over me. By afternoon, I found a small gas station and pulled in to refuel. The attendant, a wiry old man with a sun-weathered face, noticed the scratches on the RV and asked what had happened. I shrugged and told him it was probably a bear. He gave me a long, hard look. "Bears don't make scratches like that," he said, "and they don't knock." I laughed it off, but his words stuck with me. I decided to head to the nearest town and get a proper mechanic to look at the RV. I figured it wouldn't hurt to have someone else check it out. Maybe they'd see something I missed. The town of Red Cliff was small but charming. I found a mechanic, Hank, who agreed to take a look at the RV. As he inspected the scratches, his brow furrowed. "These aren't from any animal I know," he said, "and I've been out here my whole life. Looks like something tried to get in." "What do you mean, tried to get in?" I asked. Hank straightened up and looked at me. "I mean, whatever did this wasn't just messing around. It was trying to get inside." I felt a chill run down my spine. I thanked Hank, paid him for his time, and decided to stay at a motel for the night. I needed a shower and a good night's sleep that didn't involve being woken up by mysterious noises. The motel was old but clean, and the woman at the front desk was friendly. I asked her if there were any strange stories or local legends about the area, half joking, but she shook her head. "Nothing like that around here," she said. "It's usually pretty quiet." That night, I slept soundly in the motel bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The next morning, I decided to cut my trip short and head back home. As I drove, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following me. I made it home without incident and parked the RV in my driveway. For a while, life returned to normal. I went back to work, met up with friends, and tried to forget about the strange encounter. But every so often, I'd catch myself staring at the scratches on the RV, wondering what had really happened. A few weeks later, I ran into Sam at a bar. He asked me how the RV trip had gone, and I told him about the scratches and the noises. He listened, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "I probably should have mentioned this earlier," he said, lowering his voice, "but when I had that RV, something similar happened to me. I just thought I was imagining things." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart sinking. Sam sighed. "One night I heard banging on the RV. Scratches appeared the next morning, just like yours. I didn't think much of it, but now I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. What do you think it is?" I asked. Sam shook his head. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's not just an animal." We sat in silence for a while, nursing our beers. Eventually, we changed the subject, but the unease lingered. A few days later, I got a call from Hank, the mechanic. He sounded rattled. "Austin, I think you should see this. Can you come by the shop?" When I arrived, Hank led me to the back of the shop, where the RV was parked. He pointed to a section of the scratches I hadn't noticed before. Embedded in the metal were small, sharp pieces of what looked like bone or claw. "I sent these to a buddy of mine who was a biologist," Hank said. "He couldn't identify them, said they're like nothing he's ever seen." I stared at the fragments, feeling a growing sense of dread. "What does that mean?" I asked. Hank shrugged. "I don't know, but it means whatever did this isn't from around here." I thanked Hank and drove home, my mind racing. Over the next few weeks, I became more paranoid. Every creak of the house, every rustle outside made me jump. I even bought a shotgun and kept it by my bed, just in case. Then one night, the noises started again. This time it was coming from outside my house. I grabbed the shotgun and peered out the window, but saw nothing. The noises continued, louder and more insistent. I stepped outside, shotgun at the ready, and circled the house. In the dim light, I saw movement near the RV. I raised the shotgun, my heart pounding. Slowly I approached. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness. As I rounded the corner, I saw it, a hunched, shadowy figure clawing at the side of the RV. My breath caught in my throat. The creature was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It had long, bony limbs, and its eyes glowed a sickly yellow in the flashlight's beam. It turned toward me, its face twisted in a grotesque snarl. For a moment we just stared at each other, and then it lunged. I fired the shotgun, the blast echoing through the night. The creature recoiled, letting out a piercing screech. I fired again, and it stumbled back, disappearing into the trees. My hands were shaking, and I could barely breathe. I ran inside, locking the doors and windows, and called the police. By the time they arrived, the creature was long gone. They searched the area but found nothing. The only evidence was the fresh scratches on the RV and the shotgun shell casings on the ground. They took my statement but didn't seem convinced. I couldn't blame them. If I hadn't seen it myself, I wouldn't have believed it either. Over the next few days, I tried to go about my life, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I talked to Sam, and he suggested we get rid of the RV. Maybe it was attracting whatever that thing was. Reluctantly, I agreed. We drove it out to a junkyard and left it there, hoping it would be the end of our troubles. For a while, it seemed to work. The noises stopped, and the scratches didn't reappear. But the sense of unease never really left. Every so often I'd catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, or hear a faint scratching in the night. I moved to a new house, far away from the old one, hoping for a fresh start. But some nights I still wake up to the sound of scratching, and I wonder if it's out there, looking for me. I've never seen it again, but I have a name for it now, a name that fits the fear it brings, the Haggard. So that's my story. I don't expect you to believe it, but it happened. And if you ever hear scratching in the night, take my advice. Don't ignore it. The fog was thicker than I'd expected. I pulled my RV into a secluded clearing in Pisgah National Forest and stepped out into the damp air, the smell of wet earth heavy in my nose. Everything was muffled, as if the forest was holding its breath. The trees were shrouded in mist, their trunks fading into the gloom, and the trail I'd heard so much about was hidden somewhere out there, waiting for me. I'd come here to find something unique. My vlog had been stagnating, and I needed a fresh angle. A fellow hiker had mentioned an unmarked trail, a path that didn't appear on any maps. One locals swore disappeared and reappeared as if it had a life of its own. Perfect. If I could document it, film the mystery, my audience would eat it up. I grabbed my camera, set it up, and filmed a quick introduction. Hey everyone, it's Nate here, and I'm in the middle of the misty Pisgah National Forest, about to track down the infamous Vanishing Trail. Legend says this path comes and goes, and people who wander too far down it don't come back. Let's see if that's true. I packed up my gear and set off into the fog. The forest was silent, the only sound my boots crunching on damp leaves. I had a GPS in my pocket just in case, but I didn't plan to use it unless things got really bad. I wanted to go off the grid, find this mysterious trail, and see if there was anything to the rumors. I'd always been a skeptic. Ghost stories and folklore are fun to tell around a campfire, but not much else. As I walked, the fog thickened, swallowing the trees. It clung to my skin, cold and heavy. It wasn't long before I found the first strange marker, a stone slab jutting from the ground, its surface covered in spiraling symbols that didn't look like any language I knew. I filmed it, talking into the camera as I described the find. This looks like something from an old burial ground, but there's no mention of this on any maps. Really makes you wonder what else is out here, hidden beneath the fog. I kept moving. The trees closed in tighter and the trail became fainter, more overgrown. Soon, it was little more than a game trail, barely wide enough to follow. I pushed forward, keeping the camera rolling, but after another hour of hiking, the trail simply disappeared. One moment, there had been a clear path. Now it was gone, swallowed by the forest. I checked my GPS, but the signal flickered weakly. The screen showed I was in the middle of nowhere. No path, no landmarks, just a blank screen with a blinking dot. Me, alone, in the fog. "Okay," I muttered. "You've dealt with worse." I turned back the way I'd come, but the forest looked different now. The trees seemed closer together, the undergrowth denser. The fog was disorienting, and I had to rely on instinct to retrace my steps. The GPS was useless. I kept walking, scanning the ground for signs of the trail, but there was nothing. I was starting to feel uneasy. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. I froze. The sound came from deeper in the forest, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching on the leaves. I turned, scanning the fog, but there was nothing, just the swirling mist. Then, out of the gloom, a figure emerged. An older man, his clothes tattered and damp, his eyes wide and vacant. "Hey," I called, my voice echoing through the stillness. "You lost too?" The man looked at me for a moment, then shuffled forward. He seemed off. His clothes were torn, his face pale, and there was a distant look in his eyes, like he wasn't entirely there. "I've been walking for days," he said, his voice hoarse. "The trail, it keeps changing." "Are you okay?" I asked, stepping toward him. He shook his head. "No one's okay out here." I frowned, feeling a cold knot of fear tighten in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "The trail, it moves. I've seen it, watched it disappear and reappear. It's not just a path, it's the forest. It doesn't want us to leave." I stared at him, my mind racing. This guy was either delirious or onto something. Either way, I didn't like the way he was talking. "Look, I have a GPS," I said, pulling it out. "We can find our way back." The man glanced at the GPS, then back at me. "It won't help. The forest is messing with it." I didn't believe him. I couldn't. I was a rational guy, and this was just a forest. I'd get us back to my RV, get this guy some help, and be done with it. But as we walked, things got stranger. The mist thickened, wrapping around the trees like a living thing. The forest seemed to shift with every step. What had been an open path a moment ago would be choked with brambles. When I looked back, trees seemed to loom closer, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. The man, whose name I learned was Eli, grew more agitated with every passing minute. "It's watching us," he muttered. "It knows we're here." "Who's watching?" I asked, growing impatient. "The forest," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's alive, and it's been here long before we were." I ignored him, focusing on the GPS, but even that was failing me. The screen flickered, the signal cutting in and out. At one point it showed me standing on a clear path, but when I looked up, there was nothing but trees. Thick, twisted trees that looked like they had grown there for centuries. We kept walking, the fog growing thicker, pressing in on us. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and the whispers started. Faint at first, like the wind through the leaves, but then more distinct voices calling out from the mist. Nate. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Did you hear that?" I asked Eli. He nodded, his eyes wide. "It's calling us." The forest. I tried to shake it off, tell myself it was just the wind, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. The voice had spoken my name. We came across a backpack tangled in the branches of a tree, high above our heads. It was old, covered in dirt and torn, but when I climbed up to retrieve it, I found fresh supplies inside, water, food, like someone had packed it yesterday. I felt a chill run down my spine. How had it gotten there? Eli was growing more paranoid, his eyes darting around like he expected the trees to come alive at any moment. "We need to leave," he kept saying, "before it's too late." We pushed forward, but no matter which direction we went, we ended up back where we started. The fog seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The whispers grew louder. Then, without warning, Eli was gone. I turned around, and he was just gone. The forest had swallowed him whole without a sound. I called out his name, but there was no response, only the dense mist pressing in on me. Panic set in. I was alone, lost in a forest that didn't want me to leave. The GPS was useless, and my camera was flickering, showing distorted footage of things I hadn't seen, shadows moving in the trees, figures lurking just out of sight. I started running, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The trees twisted and shifted around me. The fog was so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Every time I thought I'd found a way out, the forest closed in, trapping me in a maze of branches and brambles. The whispers were louder now, calling my name over and over. My camera caught glimpses of movement, dark figures moving through the mist, vanishing before I could focus on them. I didn't know what was real anymore. The forest seemed to warp around me, bending reality to its will. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the fog broke. I stumbled out of the trees and found myself back at my RV. The mist lingered at the edge of the forest, but it didn't follow. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, threw my gear into the RV, and drove, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the forest a distant memory in the rearview mirror. Back home, I reviewed the footage. I expected to see the horror I'd witnessed, the proof of the vanishing trail and the strange shifting forest. But the videos showed nothing. The trail looked normal, the mist wasn't as thick, and Eli wasn't in the footage at all. It was like he'd never existed. I tried to tell myself it had been a bad trip, that my mind had played tricks on me. But deep down, I knew the truth. The forest had let me leave, but it hadn't forgotten me, and I had a feeling it was waiting somewhere in the mist for me to return. My name is Terry Mason, and this happened to me on October 15th, 1993. It's a story I never thought I'd share, but here we are. I was always a skeptic, never one to believe in ghosts or monsters. My buddies and I decided to take a trip to an obscure campsite in the backwoods of Montana. We had our RV packed with everything we needed for a weekend of fishing, drinking, and general good times. The group was me, Mike Thatcher, and Sam Peters. We were childhood friends, tight as ever despite all the years that had passed. We'd been planning this trip for months. Mike was the outdoorsman, the guy who could start a fire with 2 sticks. Sam, on the other hand, was a tech geek but still loved the idea of roughing it out in nature. Me? I just needed a break from my job at the factory, something different from the daily grind. The campsite was about 10 miles off the main road, deep enough into the woods that we wouldn't see another soul for the whole weekend. We set up camp next to a small lake, the water calm and inviting. The first day was perfect. We fished, drank beer, and laughed about old times. That night, sitting around the fire, Sam was showing us the new satellite phone he brought along. He was always the one to have the latest gadget. Mike teased him, saying, "Why'd you bring that thing?" We're supposed to be off the grid. Sam just shrugged. You never know when you might need it. After a few hours, we turned in. The RV was cozy, and the beer helped me fall asleep fast. Around 2 a.m., I woke up needing to take a leak. I stepped outside. The night was pitch black, except for the light of the moon reflecting off the lake. The silence was deafening. As I was finishing up, I heard something rustling in the bushes behind me. I figured it was just a raccoon or something, so I didn't think much of it and went back to sleep. The next morning, Mike and Sam were already up and about. Mike was by the lake, trying to catch breakfast, while Sam was tinkering with his gadgets. "Morning, sleepyhead," Sam said as I stumbled out of the RV. I grabbed a cup of coffee and joined Mike by the water. He seemed a bit on edge, not his usual laid-back self. "Everything all right?" I asked. He just nodded. "Yeah, just didn't sleep well. Kept hearing noises." The second day went by without much happening, but that night things got weird. We were all in the RV playing cards and laughing about some stupid joke Mike made when we heard it, a distant scream. It wasn't an animal, it was human. We all froze, listening. Then it came again, louder and more desperate. Mike grabbed the flashlight and headed outside. "Stay here," he said, but Sam and I weren't about to let him go alone. We followed the sound, moving deeper into the woods. The screams turned into frantic cries for help. "Hello? Who's there?" Mike called out. The cries stopped abruptly, and the silence that followed was even more unsettling. We searched around, but found nothing. No sign of anyone. We headed back to the RV, unsettled, but trying to brush it off. "Probably some pranksters," Mike said, but none of us believed it. That night I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m. I heard something scratching at the RV door. My heart raced as I sat up, straining to hear. The scratching got louder, more insistent. I nudged Mike awake. "Do you hear that?" He listened for a moment, then nodded. Grabbing his hunting knife, we crept to the door and flung it open, but there was nothing there, just the dark, empty campsite. The next morning, Sam was gone. We searched the campsite, calling his name, but there was no trace of him. His phone, his gadgets, everything was still there. Panic set in. We had no choice but to use the satellite phone to call for help. The nearest ranger station was hours away, but they promised to send someone out. We waited, anxiety gnawing at us. The rangers arrived by noon, but they didn't find anything either. They assured us they'd keep looking and advised us to stay put. Mike and I were wrecks, barely speaking. We just sat by the fire, staring into the flames, jumping at every sound. That night I had the first watch. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside the RV. I woke Mike, and we grabbed our flashlights. Stepping out into the cold night, we saw them, bare footprints leading away from the RV into the woods. They were too large to be Sam's and definitely not ours. We followed the tracks, hearts pounding. They led to a clearing, and that's when we saw it. A figure, hunched over, tearing into something on the ground. We shone our lights on it, and it turned to face us. It wasn't human, at least not completely. Its eyes glowed in the light, and its mouth was smeared with blood. Mike screamed, and the thing bolted into the woods, moving faster than anything I'd ever seen. We approached what it had been feeding on, and my stomach turned. It was a deer, or what was left of it, mangled and half-eaten. We ran back to the RV, locked the door, and didn't sleep the rest of the night. At dawn, we packed up, ready to leave this nightmare behind. But as we were loading up, we found Sam's body. He was propped up against a tree, eyes wide open, his throat torn out. It was a sight that will haunt me forever. We got out of there fast, driving to the nearest town to report what we'd found. The police didn't believe us, of course. They thought it was a bear attack or something. They took our statements, but I could see they were skeptical. Mike and I never talked about it after that. We went our separate ways, the trip a dark memory we both tried to bury. I don't go camping anymore. I stick to places with lots of people around. But sometimes late at night I think about that thing in the woods and wonder if it's still out there. I've done some research trying to figure out what it was. The closest I've come is a creature from local folklore, something they call Wendigo, but I can't be sure. All I know is it was real, and it took my friend. The forest around me was too quiet. I'd been sitting by the campfire outside my RV, immersed in the silence for hours, but now something felt off. The kind of off you feel in your gut before your brain catches up to what's happening. No wind, no rustling in the leaves, just dead stillness. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled up to this remote campsite deep in Mount Hood National Forest. A place like this should have been full of life. Birds, insects, something. But the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant hum of the radio I'd brought along. I needed quiet after everything that had happened over the past year. I wasn't looking for distractions, just isolation. After my wife's death, nothing made sense anymore. People kept telling me I needed to move on, but the noise of life, the sympathy, the well-meaning advice, the friends who didn't know what to say became unbearable. So I packed up and hit the road, hoping the wilderness would give me space to think, or maybe stop thinking altogether. I thought the forest would help. It had, until now. The radio's static broke the silence, a sudden burst of garbled noise that made me jump. I turned my head toward the RV where the old ham radio sat inside. I hadn't even touched the thing in hours. It was an antique I'd brought along to mess around with in my downtime, but the signal had been dead all day. No stations, no chatter, nothing. Until now. I stood up from the fire, walked over to the RV and ducked inside to check the radio. The static was louder, more insistent, like it was trying to form words but couldn't quite get there. I twisted the dial, searching for a clearer signal, but all I got was more white noise. Then, through the crackling, I heard it. A voice, faint and garbled, speaking numbers 1, 3, 7, 8, 9. The numbers repeated over and over, mechanical and cold, like a voice from an old number station. It didn't make sense. I was miles from anywhere, and this was supposed to be a dead zone. No signal, no interference. The voice paused for a moment, then the numbers started again. 1, 3, 7. It sent a chill through me, but I told myself it was just some rogue signal bouncing off the atmosphere. Maybe a military transmission. There were logical explanations for this kind of thing. I was sure of it. But the way the numbers repeated over and over felt wrong. Like the message wasn't for just anyone, it was for me. I shut the radio off. My fingers were trembling slightly. I wasn't here for this. I needed quiet, not some weird radio signal rattling around in my head. The next day, I tried to forget about the radio. I spent the morning hiking through the woods. The towering pines loomed overhead like silent giants. The air was cool and damp. The sky just a sliver of grey through the dense canopy. But something gnawed at me, a faint buzzing at the back of my mind. No birds, no animals, just silence. When I returned to the campsite, the radio was on again, static blaring from the speakers. I hadn't touched it. I stepped inside the RV, staring at the radio like it might come to life. The static was louder now, more intense. I could feel it in my bones, like the vibration from a low hum in the ground. And beneath the static, the numbers were back. 1, 3, 7, 8. I slammed my hand down on the off switch, killing the sound. My pulse was racing, my mind scrambling for an explanation. It had to be a glitch. Something with the wiring, maybe a stray electrical signal. I'd worked with enough technology over the years to know that things sometimes did strange things when you weren't looking. But the numbers, the way they were so clear, so deliberate. I shook it off and stepped back outside, trying to push the growing unease away. That's when I noticed the man standing at the edge of my campsite. I hadn't heard him approach. He was just there, tall, scruffy, wearing a weathered jacket and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked like a camper, but there was something about the way he stood, stiff and tense, like he was waiting for something to happen. "Hey!" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "You lost?" The man looked at me, his face tight with anxiety. "I heard it too," he said. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "Heard what?" "The signal, the numbers," he said, glancing toward the RV. "I've been picking it up on my own radio. It's not normal." My mouth went dry. "You've heard it too?" The man nodded. "I'm Ben," he said, stepping closer, his voice low. "I was camping a few miles down the road. I've been getting static, voices, weird electrical interference. My GPS stopped working. My cell phone drained to 0 in minutes." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. What do you think it is? Ben shook his head, his eyes darting toward the trees. I don't know, but it's not natural. The way the signal moves, it's like it's getting closer. My name is Arthur Gonzalez, and this happened to me on October 14th, 1994. I was 33 at the time, working a steady job as a machinist in Dayton, Ohio. I needed a break from the grind, so I decided to take the RV out for a week, just me and the open road. My buddy, Dave Holt, said he'd tag along. Dave was an old friend, the kind you could sit in silence with, and it would still feel like a conversation. We'd both been itching for a good old-fashioned camping trip, so we planned to hit the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. We left early on a Saturday morning, driving through the quiet pre-dawn hours. The drive was easy, the sun rising slowly, casting long shadows across the highway. Dave and I talked about nothing and everything. Work, women, the sorry state of the Bengals, normal stuff. We made it to the forest by mid-afternoon, found a good spot by the river, and set up camp. The RV was a 1986 Winnebago, not fancy, but comfortable. We parked it under a canopy of trees, leaves turning gold and red with the fall. The first couple of days were perfect. We fished, hiked, and cooked over the fire. The air was crisp, the river sang, and the nights were clear. On the third day, though, things took a turn. We decided to hike deeper into the forest, looking for a stream Dave swore had the best trout fishing. We'd been walking for about 2 hours when we stumbled across something strange. It was a clearing, but not a natural one. The trees had been hacked down, the ground scarred by deep ruts, like something heavy had been dragged through. Looks like someone's been here with machinery, Dave said, frowning. Doesn't make sense, I replied. We're miles from any roads. We poked around a bit, but there wasn't much to see, just the eerie silence of the forest, the kind that makes the hair on your neck stand up. We shrugged it off and moved on, but the unease stayed with us. That night, back at the RV, we sat by the fire, trying to shake off the weird vibe. Dave cracked open a couple of beers and we tried to laugh it off. Probably just some logging crew that got lost, Dave said. Yeah, maybe, I agreed, though I didn't believe it. Something felt wrong about that clearing. We turned in early, but I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing noises outside, soft rustling that could have been the wind, but didn't quite sound like it. Around midnight there was a loud crash, like something heavy had fallen. Dave and I bolted upright, grabbing flashlights and stepping outside. The clearing was bathed in moonlight, everything eerily still. But there, about 20 feet from the RV, was a massive tree branch, snapped clean off and lying across our fire pit. We looked at each other, the same question in our eyes. What could have done that? The next day, we decided to stay close to camp. Neither of us said it, but we were both on edge. The air seemed heavier, the forest quieter. We spent the day fishing by the river, trying to distract ourselves, but the unease lingered. That night, we built the fire higher and stayed up later, both of us jumpy at every snap of a twig. Around 2 a.m. we heard it, a low, guttural sound. Not quite an animal, but not human either. It echoed through the trees, sending chills down my spine. We stood up, flashlights scanning the darkness, but saw nothing. The sound came again, closer this time. Dave grabbed the hatchet from the firewood pile, and I armed myself with a heavy branch. Whatever it is, it's getting closer, Dave whispered. We backed up to the RV, our eyes darting around the clearing. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A shadow larger than any animal I'd ever seen, darting between the trees. Dave saw it too, and we both froze. "What the hell is that?" he muttered. Before I could answer, the shadow moved again, this time into the clearing. It was massive, hunched over but still towering, with limbs too long and joints bent at odd angles. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, reflecting our flashlight beams. It moved with a strange, jerky grace, like it didn't quite belong in this world. We didn't wait to find out more. Dave swung the hatchet as I yelled. We both ran back into the RV, slamming the door behind us. The creature let out a strange, high-pitched wail, and the RV shook as it slammed against the side. "Start the engine!" Dave shouted. I fumbled with the keys, my hand shaking, but finally got the engine roaring. We tore out of there, the creature's wails fading into the night. We didn't stop driving until we hit a small town a couple of hours away. We parked at a well-lit gas station and sat there, hearts pounding, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. Dave was the first to speak. "What the hell was that thing?" "I don't know," I said, "but we're not going back to find out." We reported it to the local authorities, but they looked at us like we were crazy. Two guys from out of town, spooked by shadows. They humored us, took down our statements, but we could tell they didn't believe a word. We cut the trip short and headed back to Dayton. Dave and I didn't talk much on the drive home, each of us lost in our thoughts. We never went camping again after that. Whatever was in that forest, we didn't want to risk running into it again. Years passed and we drifted apart. Life got in the way, as it often does. I'd think about that night sometimes, the way it changed everything. I'd tell the story at bars, but it always felt like a campfire tale, something that happened to someone else. People would laugh, call it a good ghost story. Only Dave and I knew the truth. One day I got a call from Dave's wife. He'd gone missing, last seen heading out for a solo camping trip back to the same forest. They found his truck, but not him. The authorities said it was probably an accident, maybe a fall, or maybe he got lost. But I knew better. Whatever was out there, it had gotten him. I never went back to the Allegheny National Forest. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear that strange wail in my dreams, see those glowing eyes in the dark. I came to know the creature by a name that seemed to fit its eerie presence, the Wendigo. A name pulled from folklore, but somehow it felt right. It was something ancient, something that didn't belong in our world, but was trapped here all the same. Years turned into decades, and I tried to move on. But there are some things you can't forget, no matter how hard you try. Some nights, I'd sit on my porch looking out into the darkness and wonder if the Wendigo was still out there, waiting. Dave never came back, and neither did my peace of mind. The forest held its secrets close, and I learned to respect that. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some nightmares, no matter how much you drink or laugh them off, never really go away. My name is Mason Black, and I'm 35 years old. This happened just a few months ago, during the tail end of summer at Quare River State Park in Missouri. I make my living as a travel writer, specializing in out-of-the-way places most people overlook. I've camped in deserts, forests and mountains, slept through blizzards and heat waves, and I've never thought of myself as someone easily rattled. But that trip to Quare River changed me. I can't even look at a forest now without thinking of what I saw. I was there to write a piece about underrated camping spots. My editor thought it would be a refreshing change of pace from the glitzy, overcrowded locations I usually covered. I agreed, thinking it might even be therapeutic, an escape from the constant reminders of my divorce, the cold silence of my empty apartment, and the gnawing feeling that my life had gone off the rails. I parked my RV in a secluded area near the Whispering Pines Trail, far from the other campers. The quiet felt inviting at first, but as I unpacked my gear, something about the air shifted. It wasn't the kind of silence you'd expect in the wilderness. It was deeper, heavier, like the forest was holding its breath. Ralph, the campground manager, had mentioned the Whispering Pines Trail in passing. "It's beautiful up there," he said, "but I wouldn't recommend camping too close. Folks say it's not right." I laughed it off, thinking he was trying to spook me. But as night fell, his words lingered. The pine trees loomed around me like towering shadows, their needle-clad branches swaying gently in the breeze. I was sitting by a small campfire editing some notes on my laptop when I first heard it. Laughter. It was faint, high-pitched, and unmistakably the laughter of children. I froze. The nearest campers were at least half a mile away, and I hadn't seen any kids when I arrived. I turned off my laptop and listened. The laughter came again, this time closer. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped outside the RV, my heart pounding. The laughter stopped, replaced by the soft rustling of leaves. I shone the light across the forest, but there was nothing, just the swaying trees and the faint outline of the trail disappearing into the woods. Then I saw them, small footprints in the dirt, heading toward the Whispering Pines Trail. The next morning, I convinced myself the laughter had been the wind. I'd heard stories of how the mind could play tricks when you're alone in the wilderness. Still, as I followed the Whispering Pines trail to gather material for my article, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that I wasn't alone. The trail twisted through dense woods, the canopy so thick that sunlight barely filtered through. About an hour in, I noticed carvings on the trees, simple at first, like the kind kids might make, but they grew more elaborate the further I walked. There were strange symbols, circles with intersecting lines, crude stick figures, and spirals that seemed to twist endlessly. Some of the carvings looked fresh, the bark still raw and bleeding sap. I snapped a few photos, but when I reviewed them, the images were distorted, filled with static and streaks of light. I frowned, blaming my old camera, but deep down I felt a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. By midday I'd stumbled upon something strange, a rusted swing set hidden deep in the woods, its chains creaking softly in the breeze. The sight stopped me in my tracks. There was no reason for it to be there, no picnic areas, no signs of a campsite, just this decaying remnant of someone's forgotten past. I approached cautiously, my boots crunching on the dry needles that blanketed the ground. Near the swing set, half buried in the dirt, was a small shoe. It was faded and cracked, the kind of thing that might belong to a child from decades ago. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. A chill ran down my spine. The shoe was still warm. That evening, the forest seemed even darker than before. I kept my flashlight close and locked the RV's doors before settling in for the night. I tried to write, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the swing set and the shoe. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of tapping, soft and rhythmic, like small hands drumming on the RV windows. My heart leapt into my throat. "Who's there?" I called out, grabbing my flashlight. The tapping stopped. I hesitated for what felt like an eternity before stepping outside. The forest was eerily quiet again, the air thick with an almost tangible weight. Then I saw it, a dusty old doll lying on the ground, its button eyes staring blankly up at me. I looked around, shining the flashlight in every direction, but the forest was empty, or so I thought. When I turned back toward the RV, I saw them, figures standing just at the edge of the light. They were small, no taller than children. Their faces were pale and indistinct, like smudged photographs. The figures didn't move, but I could feel their eyes on me. Panic surged through me, and I bolted back inside the RV, locking the door behind me. That night, I barely slept. Shadows darted past the windows, and faint whispers filled the air. They sounded like children's voices, overlapping in a chaotic chorus, but I couldn't make out the words. The next day, desperate for answers, I drove to the nearest town and visited the local library. An old woman at the desk seemed hesitant when I asked about the Whispering Pines trail, but eventually she brought out a box of yellowed newspapers. The articles painted a grim picture. In the 1930s, a group of children from a nearby orphanage had gone missing during a summer camping trip. Their bodies were never found, and the case remained unsolved. The area had been abandoned soon after, left to rot under the weight of tragedy. One photo caught my eye, a grainy image of the children lined up in front of the swing set I'd found in the woods. Determined to get to the bottom of things, I returned to the forest and retraced my steps. This time, I ventured deeper, following a faint trail that seemed to appear and disappear at random. Eventually, I came across an old, dilapidated cabin, its walls covered in the same strange symbols I'd seen carved into the trees. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay. The floor was littered with toys, dolls, wooden blocks, marbles, all caked in dust. On the walls, crude carvings depicted stick figures surrounded by flames. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment I thought I heard laughter again, faint and echoing. That night a storm rolled in, trapping me in the RV. Lightning illuminated the forest in brief, blinding flashes, and thunder rattled the windows. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, accompanied by the sound of small feet running circles around the RV. Then the children appeared inside. They didn't open the door or crawl through a window. They were just there, pale and translucent, their eyes wide and empty. They stared at me, their mouths moving soundlessly. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. My flashlight died, plunging the RV into darkness. As the storm raged outside, my mind was flooded with images. Not memories, but something else. I saw the children's last moments, the fire consuming the cabin, their screams as they tried to escape, and the counselor who failed to save them. The children weren't just haunting the forest. They were trapped in it, reliving their deaths over and over, unable to move on. Desperate, I gathered the doll and the toys I'd found, piling them outside the RV. I doused them with lighter fluid and lit a match. The flames roared to life, and the whispers turned into anguished cries. The storm ceased abruptly, leaving the forest eerily still. The children were gone. I left Quare River State Park the next morning, my hands trembling on the wheel. I never finished the article. Some stories, I realized, aren't meant to be told. But even now, as I write this, I can feel their presence. A faint tap on the window, a whisper just out of earshot, a reminder that some tragedies can't be left behind. You won't believe the craziness that went down last year. I still can't wrap my head around it, but here's how it all started. My name is Logan Banner. Yeah, that's me, the guy who had the weirdest day in the history of weird days. You see, I grew up in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico. It's a small town called Macaro. Ever heard of it? Yeah, me neither. Until I had to move there when I was 12 because my mom got some job she couldn't pass up. It's the kind of place where everybody knows everybody and nothing ever happens. I'd like to think that I'm a pretty grounded guy, you know, someone who doesn't buy into all the supernatural mumbo-jumbo. But man, after what I went through, I don't know anymore. It was a Friday. I remember because I had taken the day off to go hiking up in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. I've always loved being outdoors, it clears my head. I was up there, just minding my own business, soaking in the peace and quiet. There was this old trail that not many people used anymore. It was kind of my secret spot. So there I was, walking along this trail when I heard something behind me. At first I thought it was just the wind rustling the leaves, but then I heard it again. It sounded like footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps. I turned around, but there was nothing there. Weird, right? I shook it off and kept walking. About half an hour later, I stumbled upon this old cabin. I'd never seen it before, and I'd been hiking those mountains for years. It looked abandoned, with vines growing all over it and the windows boarded up. Naturally, I was curious. I mean, who wouldn't be? So I decided to check it out. As I got closer, I noticed something off. The air felt heavier, like it was pressing down on me. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. I walked up to the door, which was hanging off its hinges, and stepped inside. The place was a mess. Old furniture covered in dust, cobwebs everywhere, and a smell that made me gag. It smelled like something had died in there. I was about to turn around and leave when I heard it again, those footsteps. But this time, they were inside the cabin. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it was going to burst out of my chest. I looked around, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from, but I couldn't see anything. That's when I felt the hand on my shoulder. I spun around so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. There was nobody there. I'm not kidding. The place was empty. I don't scare easily, but at that moment I was ready to bolt. Before I could move, I heard a voice. It was faint, like a whisper, but I could make out the words, "Help me." Now I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just get the hell out of there? Trust me, I wanted to. But something about that voice made me stay. It sounded so desperate, so helpless. Against my better judgment, I called out, "Hello? Who's there?" No response, just silence. I took a deep breath and decided to follow the sound. It seemed to be coming from the back of the cabin. As I made my way through the debris, I noticed a trapdoor in the floor. It was partially open, with a set of wooden stairs leading down into darkness. I hesitated for a moment, then grabbed my flashlight from my backpack and started down the stairs. The basement was even worse than the cabin above it. It was damp and cold, with mold growing on the walls. I shined my flashlight around, looking for any signs of life. That's when I saw her, a young woman, probably in her 20s, chained to the wall. She looked terrified, her clothes torn and dirty, with bruises all over her body. She was shivering. I rushed over to her and tried to break the chains, but they were solid metal. "Who did this to you?" I asked, but she just shook her head, too scared to speak. I tried to reassure her, telling her I would get her out of there, but honestly, I didn't know how. That's when I heard the footsteps again, this time coming down the stairs. I turned around, ready to face whoever was coming, but what I saw made my blood run cold. It was a creature unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with matted fur and long, sharp claws. Its face was a grotesque mix of human and animal features, and it was staring right at me with a hunger that sent chills down my spine. I grabbed a piece of wood from the floor and held it out in front of me like a makeshift weapon. "Stay back!" I yelled. But the creature just snarled and started toward me. I swung the wood as hard as I could, but it barely made a dent. The creature swatted it away like it was nothing and lunged at me. I managed to dodge at the last second, but I wasn't fast enough. Its claws raked across my arm, tearing through my jacket and into my skin. The pain was excruciating, but I didn't have time to think about it. I grabbed the woman and pulled her behind me, trying to shield her from the creature. It backed us into a corner, its eyes locked on mine. I knew we were in deep trouble. That's when I remembered the flare gun in my backpack. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I fumbled to get it out, my hand shaking, and aimed it at the creature. "Come on, you ugly bastard," I muttered under my breath and pulled the trigger. The flare hit the creature in the chest, and it let out a roar of pain. It stumbled back, smoke rising from the wound. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed the woman's hand and we ran up the stairs as fast as we could. The creature was right behind us, but the flare had slowed it down enough for us to get a head start. We burst out of the cabin and into the daylight. I didn't stop running until we were well away from the cabin. My heart was pounding in my ears. Finally, we collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. The woman was crying, and I put my arm around her, trying to comfort her. "It's okay," I said, even though I wasn't sure it was. "We're safe now." After a few minutes, I pulled out my phone and called the police. They showed up about an hour later, along with an ambulance. They took the woman to the hospital, and I gave my statement to the officer. I told them everything that had happened, but I could tell they didn't believe me. I mean, who would? It sounded like something out of a horror movie. A few days later, I went back to the cabin with a couple of friends. We were armed this time, just in case. But when we got there, the place was gone. I'm not talking about destroyed or burned down. I mean, it was like it had never existed. There was no sign of the cabin, the basement, or the creature, just an empty clearing in the woods. We searched the area, but there was nothing. No footprints, no claw marks, nothing. It was like the whole thing had been a bad dream. But I know what I saw, and I have the scars to prove it. I kept in touch with the woman, whose name was Alara. She didn't remember much about how she ended up in that cabin, just that she had been hiking in the mountains and then everything went black. She was grateful that I found her, but she was as confused as I was about the whole thing. The police eventually closed the case, chalking it up to a wild animal attack. They didn't find any evidence of the creature, and without the cabin there was nothing to go on. But I know it's still out there somewhere in those mountains, and every time I go hiking, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I guess the moral of the story is, don't go poking around in places you don't belong. You never know what you might find or what might find you. The end, or maybe just the beginning. My name is Juan Campbell, and this happened to me on July 15th, 1999. I was never much of an outdoorsman, but when my buddy Chuck Peterson suggested we take his new RV out for a camping trip, I thought, why not? It'd be good to get away from the city, maybe clear my head a bit. So Chuck, his girlfriend Lucy, and I set off for a small campground near the Washington National Forest in Arkansas. It was supposed to be a weekend of beer, barbecue, and bad jokes around the campfire. We arrived in the late afternoon, the sun still hanging high in the sky. The campground was quiet, just a couple of other RVs scattered around and a few tents pitched by the lake. We found a nice spot near the edge of the woods, giving us a bit of privacy but still close enough to the main path. Chuck parked the RV and we got to setting up our little camp. Lucy started unpacking the cooler and I wrestled with the fold-out chairs. Chuck was always the type to over-prepare. He had this huge duffel bag packed with everything you could think of: flashlights, batteries, a first aid kit, even a couple of machetes. I laughed at him, saying we were camping, not heading into the jungle. He just shrugged and said, "Better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it, right?" By the time we had everything set up, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the campground. We built a fire, cracked open some beers, and settled into a comfortable evening. Chuck told one of his usual tall tales about his days in the Marines, and Lucy teased him about embellishing the details. It was the kind of night that felt perfect in its simplicity. As the night wore on, we started hearing strange noises from the woods. At first it was just the usual sounds of nature: crickets, frogs, the occasional rustle of leaves. But then it turned into something else. It was a sort of scratching sound, like something clawing at the bark of a tree. I glanced at Chuck, but he just shrugged, dismissing it as a raccoon or some other critter. We eventually decided to call it a night. Chuck and Lucy took the RV's main bed, leaving me to crash on the fold-out couch. I fell asleep quickly, the beer and the fresh air lulling me into a deep slumber. I woke up to the sound of banging on the side of the RV. Groggy and disoriented, I stumbled to the window, peering out into the dark. I couldn't see anything, just the flickering light of the dying campfire casting eerie shadows. The banging stopped, and I figured it must have been an animal. I crawled back onto the couch and tried to fall asleep again, but something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The next morning I told Chuck about the noises, but he just laughed it off. "Probably a raccoon looking for food," he said, patting me on the back. Lucy seemed a bit more concerned, but she didn't say anything. We spent the day hiking around the lake, fishing, and generally goofing off. It was a good day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As the sun started to set again, we returned to the campsite and fired up the grill. Chuck and I were in the middle of a heated debate about the best way to cook a steak when we heard it again, that scratching noise, closer this time. "Maybe it's Bigfoot," Chuck joked, but there was an edge to his voice that hadn't been there before. We decided to stay up late, keeping an eye on the woods. We sat around the fire, talking and drinking, but none of us were really into it. Every little sound made us jump, and the shadows seemed to move in ways they hadn't before. Around midnight, we heard it again, louder and more persistent this time. Chuck grabbed one of his machetes and a flashlight. "Stay here," he told Lucy and me before heading toward the noise. Lucy clung to me, her eyes wide with fear. I didn't want to admit it, but I was scared too. Chuck disappeared into the darkness, the beam of his flashlight bobbing up and down. We heard him cursing, and then a loud thud followed by silence. Lucy started to cry, and I knew I couldn't just sit there. I grabbed the other machete and followed the path Chuck had taken. The woods were eerily quiet, the only sound my own breathing and the crunch of leaves underfoot. I found Chuck lying on the ground, unconscious but breathing. Something had hit him hard. I dragged him back to the campsite, struggling with his weight. Lucy helped me get him inside the RV. We locked the doors and windows, and I stayed up all night, machete in hand, listening to the sounds outside. Every so often I'd hear that scratching noise, but it never got close. The next morning, Chuck woke up with a splitting headache and no memory of what had happened. We decided to cut the trip short and head back to civilization. As we packed up, we found deep claw marks on the side of the RV, right where I'd heard the banging the night before. They were too big to be from any animal I knew of. We left that place in a hurry, none of us saying much on the drive back. We tried to laugh it off, but the tension was palpable. Chuck and Lucy dropped me off at my apartment, and we promised to keep in touch, but we never did. Something about that weekend changed us, and none of us wanted to relive it. I did some research afterward, trying to figure out what might have attacked us. I found stories about a creature that some locals called the Reaper. They said it lived in the woods, preying on campers and hikers who wandered too far off the path. I don't know if I believe in folklore, but I can't deny what I saw and heard. It's been years since that trip, but I still think about it every time I hear a scratching noise. It takes me back to that campsite, to the fear and confusion. I haven't been camping since, and I doubt I ever will again. Some things are best left unexplored, and some stories are better left untold. My name is Mason Martin. I was 34 when I spent 3 nights alone at Widow's Ridge in West Virginia, chasing a story I should have left alone. This happened in the fall of 2021, when the air carried the first chill of winter, and the forest turned crimson and gold. I was a freelance writer known for my series on haunted places in America, and my latest article was supposed to focus on Widow's Ridge, a secluded spot in Monongahela National Forest. Locals spoke of Eleanor Price, the widow of the Ridge, a woman accused of witchcraft in the late 1800s. Her husband and children had vanished, and the townsfolk blamed her. Some claimed she killed them in a ritual, others whispered darker things. She was hanged from a gnarled oak tree at the ridge, and since then the area had become a magnet for tragedy. Disappearances, strange deaths, and whispers in the night. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I knew fear made for great stories. So, armed with my RV, a few cameras, and my journal, I set out to uncover the truth. I was used to spooky places, creaky floors, and the paranoia of being alone. Widow's Ridge would be no different, or so I thought. I arrived just before sunset. The ridge was beautiful in a desolate way, with a rocky overlook offering sweeping views of the valley below. The wind whistled through the trees, and the skeletal oak stood alone in the clearing, its twisted branches like claws against the sky. A rope dangled from one of the limbs, frayed and swaying gently. I parked my RV in the clearing and set up camp. As the sun dipped below the horizon, shadows stretched long, and the ridge grew eerily silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the hollow hum of the wind. The first unease crept in, but I brushed it off. Quiet nights in the woods were common. The first sign came that evening. I was reviewing my notes when the sound of soft crying reached my ears. It was faint, carried on the wind, but unmistakable. I froze, straining to hear more. The crying stopped, replaced by a whisper so faint I couldn't make out the words. My pulse quickened. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, scanning the clearing. "Hello?" I called. "Is someone there?" The wind answered me. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a trick of the breeze or a distant animal call. But as I turned back toward the RV, I saw something that made my blood run cold. My journal, which I had left on the table inside, was now lying on the ground, its pages fluttering in the wind. I hadn't touched it. The next day I met Evelyn Brooks, a reclusive older woman who lived a few miles from the ridge. I had stumbled upon her cabin while hiking, hoping to gather local lore. She answered the door with a wary expression, her grey hair pulled back in a loose bun. "You shouldn't be up there," she said as soon as I mentioned Widow's Ridge. "That place is cursed." "I'm writing about the legend," I explained. "Do you know anything about Eleanor Price?" Evelyn hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "She wasn't a witch, if that's what you're asking. She was a grieving mother. But grief makes people cruel, and they needed someone to blame." "Do you think her ghost is real?" I asked, trying to keep the skepticism out of my voice. Evelyn didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, "If you're smart, you'll leave, and don't go near that tree. It's the anchor, her pain, her rage, it's all tied to that cursed oak." I thanked her, but didn't leave. This was the kind of detail my readers loved. That night, the ridge turned hostile. It started with the scratches, faint at first, like twigs scraping the side of the RV. I ignored it, but the sound grew louder, more deliberate. When I stepped outside to investigate, there was nothing there, just the wind and the dark silhouette of the oak. Then came the knocking, sharp, deliberate taps on the RV's windows. I spun around, shining my flashlight, but I was alone. My heart pounded as I locked the door and drew the curtains. At midnight, I awoke to the sound of my own voice calling from the woods. "Mason, help me." The voice was weak, trembling, and unmistakably mine. My blood turned to ice. It was as if a recording of my voice was being played back to me, distorted and wrong. I huddled in the corner of the RV, clutching my flashlight like a lifeline. I didn't sleep. The next morning I found footprints circling the RV, bare, human footprints that started and ended at the oak tree. They were too small for an adult, too large for a child, and they chilled me to my core. My camera, left on the table overnight, showed distorted images of the ridge with blurry, shadowy figures in the background. I knew I should leave, but the journalist in me refused. If I could capture proof of the supernatural, it would be a career-defining moment. So I stayed. That afternoon I found an old locket buried near the oak. It was tarnished but intact, with a photo of a woman and 2 children inside, Eleanor Price and her children, I assumed. I tucked it into my pocket, feeling a pang of guilt I couldn't explain. That night, Eleanor made herself known. The air grew heavy, suffocating. The wind stopped entirely. The RV shook violently, as if an unseen force was slamming into it. Then the lights inside flickered, and a shadow appeared, tall and veiled, standing in the center of the room. I couldn't move. My limbs felt frozen as the figure drifted closer, its form growing more defined. I saw her face, pale, hollow, with blackened eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. "Why are you here?" she hissed, her voice like a winter wind. "You disturb my rest." "I'm sorry," I stammered. "I didn't mean to." The shadow lunged and the world went dark. I woke just before dawn, slumped against the RV wall. The interior was trashed, papers scattered, windows shattered. The locket was gone, and in its place was a single word scratched into the table. Leave. But I couldn't leave, not yet. Evelyn's words echoed in my mind. The oak tree was the anchor. If I wanted to end this, I had to confront it. I stood before the tree at sunrise, holding a canister of lighter fluid and a box of matches. The rope hanging from the branch swayed unnaturally, as if moved by invisible hands. The air buzzed with energy, thick and oppressive. "I'm sorry, Eleanor," I whispered, pouring the fluid around the base of the tree. "But this has to end." The moment I struck the match, the ground trembled. Eleanor's ghost appeared, her form writhing in agony. She screamed, a sound that shook the forest, and charged at me, her veiled figure becoming a blur of shadow and fury. I lit the ring of fire just in time. The flames roared to life, encircling the oak and driving her back. She thrashed and wailed, her form dissipating into the smoke as the fire consumed the cursed tree. When it was over, the ridge was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. Peaceful, almost serene. The oppressive weight had lifted. I returned to Evelyn's cabin to thank her, but the house was abandoned, covered in years of dust. On the porch was a note scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Some stories aren't meant to be told." I left Widow's Ridge that day and never returned. To this day, I don't know if Eleanor found peace or if I simply freed her from the anchor. All I know is that some places hold darkness so deep it's better to leave it undisturbed. My name is Willie Patel, and back in 1988, I found myself in the middle of nowhere near Kearney, Nebraska, trying to fix a flat tire on a road that looked like it hadn't seen civilization in decades. I wasn't in a rush. I was driving back from a cousin's wedding, feeling a little smug because I'd finally beaten my record for the most mediocre best man speech in history. The car was an old Dodge Dart, and its jack was rustier than my uncle's jokes. Kneeling on gravel and cursing under my breath, I heard a strange hum, not the soft kind like bees or a distant motor, but a heavy, vibrating sound that felt like it was resonating inside my teeth. I turned around, expecting to see some souped-up truck or farm equipment barreling down the road, but there was nothing, just open fields and that never-ending Nebraska sky. The hum grew louder, and the air seemed to thicken. I stood up, thinking maybe I'd inhaled one too many tire fumes, when suddenly the clouds split open and a flash of light engulfed me. I tried to shield my face, but before I could even swear properly, my feet left the ground. Gravity decided to take a lunch break, and I floated upward into what looked like the underside of a giant metallic saucer. The next thing I knew, I was inside. The interior was clinical, metallic walls with no visible seams and a smell that reminded me of burnt popcorn and ozone. The room was dimly lit, except for a strange pulsating light in the center. My feet touched the floor, and the hum ceased. I looked around, disoriented, and then I saw them. There were two of them, standing at least 8 feet tall, with elongated angular heads and smooth, slate-colored skin. They weren't slim like the typical grey aliens you see in tabloids. These guys looked like someone crossed a linebacker with a praying mantis. Their arms were unnervingly long, ending in 3-jointed fingers. Their torsos expanded and contracted rhythmically, like they were breathing through their chests. One of them stepped forward, holding a cylindrical device. A voice, mechanical but eerily calm, emerged from it. Human designation, Willie Patel. Purpose of abduction. Behavioral analysis and genetic cataloging. What now? I blurted, my voice cracking like a teenager caught stealing a beer. The other one tilted its head, then tapped something on its arm. A projection materialized in the air, a 3-dimensional image of Earth spinning slowly. Around it were countless red dots. Data collection required for survival of collective. Your cooperation is mandatory. Yeah, no offense, but I'm not exactly in the mood to be poked and prodded, I said, taking a cautious step back. Also mandatory. That's rich coming from someone who just yanked me out of a perfectly fine patch of gravel. The first alien adjusted the cylinder, and a beam of light scanned me from head to toe. Resistance is inefficient. Inefficient? Buddy, I'm from Nebraska. Inefficiency is practically a pastime. The alien didn't laugh, no surprise there. Instead, it gestured toward a doorway that had materialized in the wall. I figured running was pointless. They'd just levitate me again. So I followed, muttering under my breath about how I'd skipped dessert at the wedding for this nonsense. The hallway led to a larger chamber filled with pods. Inside the pods were people, some awake, some not. One of the awake ones, a middle-aged guy in a bowling shirt, spotted me and mouthed, "Don't let them touch your brain." Solid advice, though not very comforting. The aliens directed me to a chair that looked like it was designed by someone who hated human anatomy. Restraints snapped around my wrists and ankles before I could even sit properly. "Okay, look," I said, trying to stall. "Can we talk about your process here? Maybe get a suggestion box? You know, constructive feedback?" The cylinder-wielding alien ignored me and tapped another control. A sharp, piercing sound filled the room, and the pods began to vibrate. The people inside started convulsing. My heart raced as I yanked at the restraints. "Hey, what are you doing to them?" I shouted. "Integration," the alien said. "Subjects provide biological variants. Anomalies identified, defective samples discarded." "Discarded," I echoed, horrified. "You mean—" Before I could finish, one of the pods shattered and a lifeless body slumped out onto the floor. My stomach churned. They weren't just abducting. They were killing anyone they deemed defective. Fueled by panic and adrenaline, I twisted my wrist until it felt like it might snap and managed to slip free of one restraint. I yanked at the other, watching the aliens as they focused on their grotesque process. The second restraint gave way, and I bolted from the chair, barreling toward the door. An alarm blared, and the walls lit up with flashing symbols. The aliens moved with unnatural speed, their long limbs propelling them toward me. I grabbed the first thing I saw, a metal rod, and swung it with all the force I could muster. It connected with one alien's arm, producing a sickening crunch. The creature staggered but didn't fall. "Great," I muttered. "Indestructible linebackers. Just my luck." I sprinted down the hallway, dodging beams of light they shot from their devices. One grazed my shoulder, leaving a searing pain, but I didn't stop. Ahead, I saw a chamber with what looked like an escape pod. I dove inside, slamming my hand on every button until the door sealed shut. The pod lurched, and I felt a sudden gut-wrenching acceleration. Through a small window, I saw the saucer shrinking into the distance. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. A red light blinked on the console, accompanied by a robotic voice. "Descent trajectory unstable. Brace for impact." "Oh, come on!" I shouted, gripping the seat as the pod hurtled toward the ground. The crash landing was rough, but I survived. Crawling out of the wreckage onto soft grass, I looked around and realized I was in the middle of a cornfield. Typical. It wasn't long before I heard sirens and saw headlights. A local farmer and the sheriff pulled up, gawking at the smoldering pod. "What in the hell is that?" the sheriff asked, his hand hovering near his gun. "Long story," I said, coughing. "Let's just say you're going to need more than a deputy for this one." The aftermath was chaotic. Authorities swarmed the area, cordoning off the site and taking me in for questioning. I told them everything, but their skepticism was thicker than molasses. It wasn't until they found the body from the pod, one of the abductees, that they started taking me seriously. Later, I overheard one of the scientists muttering about strange DNA patterns in the corpse, something about genetic modifications and alien engineering. I didn't stick around to hear more. I had enough nightmares to deal with. The last I heard, the government had whisked the pod and the body away to some undisclosed location. As for the aliens, I don't know if they'll be back. But one thing's certain, next time I'm bringing a tire iron and a shotgun. My name is Lucas Warren, and this happened to me on June 11th, 1993. I had decided to take a week off from my job as a mechanic in Baltimore to do some solo camping. I'd bought a second-hand RV, nothing fancy, but it was my escape pod. I chose a spot in the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania, a place far enough from the hustle and bustle, but close enough that I could get back if needed. I remember packing up the RV early in the morning, making sure I had enough supplies for the week: water, food, a few books, and my fishing gear. I wasn't much of a hunter, and I didn't own a gun. The most dangerous thing I expected to face was a raccoon trying to steal my food. I wasn't exactly a survivalist, just a guy looking to unplug for a bit. The drive took about 5 hours. I pulled into the campsite around noon, parked the RV, and set up. The spot was perfect, a small clearing surrounded by trees with a view of a nearby lake. There were a few other campers around, but they were scattered far enough that I felt alone. I spent the first day fishing, catching a couple of small bass and reading a bit. The weather was perfect, and I felt more relaxed than I had in months. That night, after a dinner of fresh fish and canned beans, I sat by the campfire, enjoying the quiet. I could hear the distant sounds of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. Around 10, I decided to call it a night. I doused the fire, locked up the RV, and climbed into bed. I slept well the first night, waking up with the sun. I spent the next couple of days exploring the area, hiking and fishing. I ran into a few other campers, exchanging nods and small talk, but mostly kept to myself. It was on the third night that things started to get strange. I was sitting by the fire, enjoying a beer, when I heard rustling in the bushes behind the RV. At first, I thought it was just a deer or some other animal, but the sound was heavier, more deliberate. I stood up and called out, "Who's there?" But there was no response. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the noise, but saw nothing, just trees and darkness. I shook it off and went back to my seat, but the uneasy feeling lingered. I finished my beer and decided to head to bed early. I made sure everything was locked up tight before crawling into bed. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to a strange sound, a low, rhythmic thumping. It was coming from outside near the rear of the RV. My heart started to race as I lay there, listening. Thump, thump, thump. I got out of bed slowly, trying not to make any noise. I peeked through the small window at the back, but it was too dark to see anything. The thumping continued, steady and relentless. I debated going outside to check it out, but decided against it. Instead, I grabbed my pocket knife and sat on the edge of the bed, waiting. After what felt like hours, the noise stopped. I stayed awake, listening for any other sounds, but everything was quiet again. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep, the knife still in my hand. The next morning, I found a series of deep, parallel scratches on the back of the RV near the storage compartment. They were too high up to be made by any animal I could think of. My mind raced with possibilities, but I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe it was some kind of prank. I decided to stay an extra night, thinking I might be overreacting. That day, I drove into the nearest town to get some extra supplies, and maybe a weapon. But the small hardware store didn't carry firearms. I picked up a sturdy hatchet and some bear spray, figuring it was better than nothing. The guy behind the counter, a wiry old man named Hank, gave me a curious look when I asked about guns. "Don't get many folks asking for guns out here," he said. "You sure you're okay?" "Yeah, just had a weird night." "Probably nothing," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "Well, if you need help, there's a ranger station about 10 miles up the road. Ranger's name is Joe. Good guy." "Thanks. I'll keep that in mind." I headed back to the campsite, the unease gnawing at me. I spent the day close to the RV, chopping wood and trying to distract myself. As night fell, I built a larger fire than usual, the hatchet and bear spray within arm's reach. Around midnight, the thumping started again. This time it was louder, more insistent. I grabbed the hatchet and stepped outside, my heart pounding. The fire cast long shadows, and I could see movement at the edge of the clearing. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice shaking. The movement stopped for a moment. Everything was still. Then, out of the darkness, a figure emerged. It was tall, impossibly tall, with long limbs and a gaunt face. Its eyes glowed faintly in the firelight, and its mouth twisted into what I can only describe as a smile. I froze, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. The creature took a step forward, and I stumbled back, nearly dropping the hatchet. It made no sound, just kept advancing slowly. "Stay back!" I yelled, raising the hatchet. The creature paused, tilting its head as if curious. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, it lunged at me. I swung the hatchet wildly, connecting with its arm. It let out a screech, a high-pitched, bone-chilling sound, and recoiled. I took the opportunity to run, scrambling back into the RV and slamming the door shut. I could hear it outside, scratching at the door and walls. I fumbled with the keys, starting the engine. The RV roared to life, and I floored it, tearing out of the campsite and down the dirt road. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. What the hell was that thing? I didn't stop until I reached the ranger station Hank had mentioned. I banged on the door, shouting for help. A tall, burly man in a ranger's uniform opened the door, looking alarmed. "Calm down, son. What happened?" I tried to explain, my words tumbling over each other. Ranger Joe listened, his face growing more serious with each word. He stepped outside, looking at the scratches on the RV. "We need to get you inside now," he said, his voice steady but urgent. We went inside, and he locked the door behind us. I noticed he had a rifle slung over his shoulder. "What did you see?" he asked, his tone grave. I described the creature, every detail I could remember. Joe listened, nodding slowly. "You're not the first to see it," he said finally. "We call it Kith. It's been around these parts for as long as anyone can remember. Usually keeps to itself, but sometimes." He trailed off, staring out the window into the darkness. I felt a chill run down my spine. This was real. This thing was real. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We wait. It usually doesn't follow this far, but we stay vigilant. If it comes, we're ready." We sat in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. Hours passed, and dawn finally broke. The creature, Kith, didn't show up. Joe helped me patch up the RV, and I decided to cut my trip short. As I drove away from the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide something. Every sound made me jump. I got back to Baltimore and went straight to a pawn shop, buying a shotgun. I never went camping alone again. Years later, I still think about that night. I never told anyone else, figuring they'd think I was crazy. But I know what I saw, and I know that Kith is still out there, in the deep, dark woods, waiting. So if you ever find yourself in the Allegheny National Forest, be careful. Stay alert, because some things in this world are beyond our understanding, and some stories are best left untold. My name is Caleb White, and I was 29 years old when I decided to abandon my city life and embrace the solitude of the wild. This happened in the spring of 2022, deep in the remote expanse of Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. I had traded the chaos of my old life, a grueling tech job and a breakup that left me hollow, for the tranquility of the Appalachian wilderness. At least that's what I thought I'd find. I had heard whispers about Black Hollow, an isolated area nestled near Cheat Mountain, but they were just that, whispers. Locals at the last gas station warned me about strange happenings in the hollow, but I chalked it up to small-town superstition. I wanted quiet, not ghost stories. My RV, modest but reliable, became my sanctuary. Equipped with solar panels and enough supplies to last a week, I parked at the edge of the hollow and planned to spend my days hiking and journaling. The first few hours were serene, just the sounds of chirping birds and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. But by sunset, the forest had changed. The first sign was the silence. It was as if someone had flipped a switch, muting every bird and every insect. I paused mid-step on my way back to the RV, my boots crunching against the gravel road, the only sound. A chill crawled up my spine, but I shook it off. Solitude does strange things to the mind. As I prepared dinner that evening, the quiet pressed against the walls of the RV. I tried turning on my solar-powered lights, but they flickered weakly before going out entirely. A malfunction, I thought. I could fix it tomorrow. I used a flashlight instead, its narrow beam making the shadows seem alive. I was climbing into bed when I heard it, my own voice, faint and far away, calling out from the woods. Help! Someone help me! I froze, my heart hammering. It sounded distorted, like a bad recording, but it was unmistakably me. I grabbed my flashlight and swung the beam toward the trees outside the window. Nothing. The voice came again, weaker this time. I thought about venturing out, but my instincts screamed at me to stay inside. I locked the door and spent a restless night listening to the silence. The next morning, I met Maya Carter, a hiker in her mid-20s with a backpack nearly her size. She startled me as I was adjusting my solar panels. Her bright smile clashed with the uneasy mood of the forest. "Hey there," she said. "Didn't expect to see anyone else out here. Most people avoid this place." "I'm Caleb," I said, extending a hand. "What brings you to Black Hollow?" She explained that she was researching Appalachian folklore for her podcast. Her excitement was infectious, though I found her curiosity a little reckless. When I mentioned the strange silence and the voice, she brushed it off. "Classic auditory hallucination," she said. "Isolation plays tricks on you." That afternoon we crossed paths with Chris Bennett, a park ranger who seemed to materialize out of the trees. He was gruff and weathered, his sharp eyes scanning the forest like he expected it to attack. "You shouldn't be here," he said bluntly. "Black Hollow isn't safe." "What do you mean?" Maya asked, her curiosity piqued. Chris hesitated, then sighed. "There's something wrong with this place. Call it folklore, call it whatever you want, but people disappear here. I've seen things I can't explain, figures that shouldn't exist. If you're smart, you'll pack up and leave." I should have listened, but pride and curiosity held me back. That night, the forest came alive with terror. Maya and I had set up camp together when the first signs appeared. We found tracks, elongated footprints too large to be human but shaped like no animal I'd ever seen. They circled the RV and led off into the woods, vanishing mid-trail. Maya snapped photos, excited about the evidence, while I felt an icy weight settle in my chest. Later, as we sat by the fire, Maya gasped. "Caleb," she whispered, pointing. At the edge of the clearing stood a figure, me. It looked like me, down to the jacket I was wearing, but its proportions were wrong. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted unnaturally. The firelight reflected off its eyes, 2 pinpricks of glowing yellow. It didn't move, just stared. "What the hell is that?" Maya whispered. Before I could respond, the thing vanished into the trees, its departure marked by a guttural growl that made my stomach churn. We retreated into the RV, locking the door and killing the lights. The creature prowled outside all night, scratching at the walls and whispering in our voices. By morning, Chris found us, his face grim. "It knows you're here now," he said. "What is it?" I asked, my voice shaky. "Locals call it a skinwalker," Chris said. "It's tied to this land, ancient and vengeful. It thrives on fear, on driving people mad. You can't kill it, but you might be able to keep it at bay." His plan involved fire. We would build a ring of flames around the RV and hold our ground until dawn. "But it won't like that," Chris warned. "It'll fight back." That night, the forest seemed to breathe, the wind carrying voices and the sound of snapping branches. As we lit the fire, the skinwalker revealed its full horror. It no longer bothered with disguises. It stalked the edge of the flames as a grotesque hybrid of man and beast, its face twisted into a permanent snarl. It growled, low and menacing, before lunging at the barrier, only to recoil with a shriek. It didn't stop. It circled the fire endlessly, its form shifting from human to animal to something unrecognizable. The sight was maddening, and I fought to keep my focus. Then it changed tactics. "Caleb," it called in Maya's voice. "It's me. I'm hurt. Please help." I looked at her, huddled beside Chris, pale and shaking. "Don't listen," she whispered. Chris suddenly stood, his face blank. "It's calling me," he muttered. "Chris, no." I grabbed his arm, but he shook me off and stepped into the dark. The skinwalker pounced, its claws tearing into him as he screamed. Maya and I watched in horror, unable to do anything. By dawn, the forest was silent again, and the creature was gone. We stumbled back to the edge of the hollow, Chris's sacrifice heavy on our shoulders. His warning stayed with me. Some places aren't meant for us. I abandoned my RV and left Black Hollow, vowing never to return. Maya quit her podcast, too haunted to revisit the story she once sought. To this day, I hear that growl in my nightmares, and I wonder if it's still out there, watching, waiting. If you ever find yourself in Black Hollow, heed this warning. Turn back. Some legends are real, and they hunger. It's funny, the things you think you'll remember about your life and the things that actually stick. For me, it's the smell of sulfur. Not the kind you expect to find in a park, right? But that's the thing. When you work as a ranger, you learn real quick that nature doesn't care what you expect. My name's Felix Doss, and in 2014 I was stationed in the Allegan National Forest in Pennsylvania. It wasn't my first choice. I'd requested Yosemite. Dream big, right? But the budget had other plans for me. Turns out I got more excitement out here than I ever would have in a place with a view like that. I wasn't exactly the outdoorsy type growing up, city boy through and through. But after working a few dead-end jobs, I figured, why not go somewhere with actual fresh air? I thought it would be peaceful. Solitude, you know? The kind that gives you space to figure things out. What no one tells you about solitude is that it gives you too much time to think. Eventually, you start hearing things that aren't there, or worse, you hear things that are there. I was on patrol that day, the same route I'd taken dozens of times. Hiking the trails, checking the campsites, making sure no one was burning down the forest. I had one of those old walkie-talkies clipped to my belt. Never really worked, but protocol and all. Around mid-afternoon, I reached this spot called Dead Man's Overlook. It's not as morbid as it sounds. Some local legend about a miner who slipped and fell there back in the 1800s. The story never made much sense, but locals clung to it like an heirloom. Tourists loved it too. It's got a view that stretches for miles, thick trees and a river cutting through the valley. Nothing about it screamed danger to me, until I saw the smoke. Normally, I'd figure it was some camper with more enthusiasm than skill trying to start a fire, but this smoke was different, thick and dark, like it had an agenda. I picked up the pace, my boots crunching on the dirt path, and radioed back to the station. No reply, of course. When I got closer, the air changed. That sulfur smell hit me hard, like the world had gone rotten. I remember thinking, what the hell is someone burning out here? I followed the scent, more out of curiosity than duty at that point, and it led me to this clearing I didn't recognize. I'd covered the area 100 times, but I'd never seen this spot before. Not once. There was something wrong about the place. The trees were older here, thick and gnarled like they'd seen too much. The clearing was small, just a patch of bare earth surrounded by forest so dense it blocked out the sun. And in the middle of it was a fire, if you could call it that. More like embers glowing in a circle, almost ritualistic. There were bones too, not animal, human. Some looked old, but a few had fresh meat clinging to them, like whoever left them here hadn't finished their work. That's when I heard it. Not a growl, not a roar, more like a scraping sound, like something dragging itself through the underbrush. My first instinct was to call it in, but of course the walkie was useless. Figures. I crouched low, pulling out the only weapon I had, a standard-issue knife. Nothing fancy, but sharp enough to get the job done. As I listened, the sound got closer, more deliberate. I scanned the trees, looking for movement, and that's when I saw it. It moved like a deer, but it sure as hell wasn't one. Too big, for one thing, easily 8 feet tall when it stood up on its hind legs. Its body was gaunt, almost skeletal, with skin stretched so tight over its frame that I could see every bone and tendon. The face, if you can call it that, was elongated, with a snout like a wolf, but something about it was off, like a child's drawing of a wolf, exaggerated and wrong. Its mouth was full of teeth that didn't fit together, jagged and uneven, like they'd been shoved in there without care for symmetry. And those legs, God, those legs. They bent backward like a dog's, but longer and more human. It moved fast despite its appearance, low, forward, like it was used to this place, like it owned it. And then it stopped, standing just outside the clearing, watching me with something that felt uncomfortably close to intelligence. I didn't move, didn't even breathe, and for a moment neither did it. We were locked in some kind of stalemate, both sizing each other up. I've seen wolves before, coyotes too, but this thing wasn't like that. It wasn't hunting for food. It was hunting for sport. Maybe even for fun. When it lunged, there, I said it. It was so fast I barely had time to react. I rolled to the side, slashing at it with my knife. I swear I hit it, but the blade might as well have been a toothpick. It just kept coming. I ran, not my proudest moment, but I wasn't sticking around to see how that thing liked its ranger cooked. I tore through the woods, branches smacking me in the face, my legs burning from the effort. It was close. I could hear it behind me, that same scraping noise getting louder. I had no idea where I was going, just that I had to keep moving. At some point I broke through the trees and into another part of the forest, somewhere more familiar. I think it was pure luck, honestly. That's when I heard it. Them, actually. Voices. Human voices. I sprinted toward them, stumbling into a campsite where two guys were just hanging out, as completely oblivious to the nightmare I'd just escaped. They looked at me like I'd lost my mind. And maybe I had. I didn't even try to explain. I just yelled for them to run. One of the guys, a big dude with a beard, looked like he was about to argue, but the sound of that thing crashing through the trees changed his mind real quick. We bolted together, all three of us, and I'm not ashamed to admit that one of them outran me. Adrenaline does that to people, I guess. We made it to my truck somehow. I don't remember the details, just the panic and the sheer primal need to get the hell out of there. The thing didn't follow us past the tree line, but I could feel it watching. I know I said I wouldn't mention eyes, but whatever that thing used to track us, it knew we'd gotten away. For now. Back at the station, I tried to file a report. That's protocol, right? I sat down at the desk, staring at the blank page, and realized I had no idea how to describe what had happened. How do you tell someone that the forest, the place you're supposed to protect, just turned on you? That something out there was hunting people, and I had no idea how to stop it. I wrote something vague about suspicious activity and left it at that. What else could I do? I wasn't about to throw my career away on a story no one would believe. The next day, I went back to the clearing. I had to. Maybe I thought I could rationalize it, convince myself it had been some weird bear or, I don't know, a trick of the light. But when I got there, the clearing was gone. Not like someone had cleaned it up. Gone, like it had never been there. The trees were just as thick as they'd always been. No signs of a fire, no bones, nothing. I stood there for what felt like an hour, just staring at the spot where I knew I'd seen the bodies. The embers. Then I turned around and walked back to the truck. There wasn't anything else to do. The other guys? I don't know what happened to them after that. They packed up and left the park the next morning. Didn't say much. Just gave me this look like they knew something too, but didn't want to talk about it. Can't say I blame them. Some things are better left unsaid. As for me, I put in a transfer request the day after. Figured maybe Yosemite wasn't so bad after all. And if anyone ever asks me why I left Allegan, I've got a simple answer ready: bad Wi-Fi. Keeps things light, you know? Plus, it's technically true. Every hunting trip had its own flavor. Some were filled with excitement and success, while others were exercises in patience and endurance. This one, however, promised to be unique, not because of what I expected to hunt, but because of what I would encounter. Neil Kaplan and I pride ourselves on being keen observers. Growing up in rural Montana taught me the skills I needed to survive and thrive in the wild. I've faced all sorts of predators, from mountain lions to grizzly bears, but nothing prepared me for what I encountered that day. It began like any other hunting trip. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, casting long shadows across the dense forest. I was in the back country near Flathead Lake, a place I'd hunted many times before. The air was crisp, and the sounds of the forest waking up provided a comforting backdrop. I was hunting elk, one of the most challenging and rewarding animals to pursue in these parts. Armed with my trusty rifle, a Winchester Model 70, and equipped with all the necessary gear, I set out before dawn to get a head start. I wasn't alone on this trip. My friend, Kevin Santiago, had joined me. He was relatively new to hunting, but his enthusiasm made up for his lack of experience. We split up early in the morning, agreeing to meet back at camp by midday. Kevin headed toward the North Ridge, while I chose to explore the denser woods to the east. It wasn't long before I found fresh tracks. I followed them cautiously, staying downwind to avoid alerting the elk. After about an hour of tracking, I came across a small clearing. There, at the far edge, was a large bull elk grazing lazily. I steadied my rifle and took aim, my heart pounding with the thrill of the hunt. Just as I was about to squeeze the trigger, a strange noise caught my attention. It was a low rumbling sound, almost like a growl, but not quite. The elk looked up, its ears twitching, and then bolted into the trees. Cursing under my breath, I lowered my rifle and scanned the area where the noise had come from, my left, deeper into the forest. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. As I moved closer, the sound grew louder, more distinct. It was unlike anything I'd heard before in the wild. The forest grew thicker, the underbrush denser, making it hard to move quietly, but my instincts told me to press on. After what felt like an eternity, I reached another clearing, smaller this time. In the center, partially hidden by the tall grass, was something that made my blood run cold. It was a carcass, or what was left of one. At first, I thought it was an elk, but as I got closer, I realized it was a person. The body was torn apart, limbs scattered, and the ground soaked with blood. The sight was gruesome enough to make even a seasoned hunter like me feel nauseous. I knelt beside the body, trying to make sense of the scene. There were deep gashes and bite marks too large for any animal I knew. My mind raced, trying to piece together what could have done this. And then I saw the footprints. They were massive, larger than any bear's, and had an unusual pattern, almost reptilian. My first thought was to find Kevin. If there was something this dangerous out here, he needed to know. I retraced my steps as quickly as I could, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and adrenaline. When I reached our agreed meeting spot, Kevin was already there, looking worried. "Neil, thank God. I thought something happened to you," he said, relief evident in his voice. "We need to get out of here," I said, not wanting to waste time with explanations. "There's something in these woods, something dangerous." Kevin's eyes widened, and he nodded. We packed up our gear as fast as we could and started making our way back to the truck. The forest, which had seemed so welcoming in the morning, now felt oppressive, each shadow hiding potential danger. As we walked, I filled Kevin in on what I'd seen. He was visibly shaken, but he kept his composure. "Do you think it's some kind of animal?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "But whatever it is, it's not something we want to meet." We moved quickly, trying to make as little noise as possible. The forest seemed eerily silent, as if every creature was hiding from whatever monster lurked in the shadows. We were about halfway to the truck when we heard it again, the same low rumbling sound. We froze, trying to pinpoint its location. It was close. Too close. Kevin motioned for us to keep moving, but we hadn't gone far when we saw it. At the edge of a thicket, partially obscured by the underbrush, was the creature. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Standing on two legs, it was at least 7 feet tall, covered in thick, matted fur. Its head was vaguely canine, with a long snout and sharp teeth that glinted in the dappled sunlight. But its eyes were what truly terrified me. They were intelligent, almost human, and filled with a malevolent hunger. Kevin raised his rifle, but I stopped him. "Don't shoot," I whispered. We don't know if it'll kill it or just make it mad. The creature sniffed the air, its gaze fixed on us. Then, with terrifying speed, it charged. We bolted, running through the forest, branches whipping at our faces. The creature was fast, much faster than us. I could hear its heavy footsteps gaining on us, feel the ground shake with each stride. We burst into another clearing, and I turned, hoping to get a clear shot. But the creature was already upon us. It swiped at Kevin, knocking him to the ground. I fired my rifle, the shot echoing through the trees. The bullet hit the creature, but it barely flinched. Kevin scrambled to his feet, blood streaming from a gash on his arm. We ran again, but the creature was relentless. It was toying with us, letting us think we had a chance before closing in for the kill. In a desperate move, I grabbed a flare from my pack and ignited it, throwing it at the creature. The bright light seemed to confuse it, giving us a few precious seconds to gain some distance. We ran toward a rocky outcrop, hoping to find some kind of shelter. The creature followed, but slower now, wary of the flares I kept throwing behind us. We reached the rocks and climbed up, finding a narrow ledge to hide on. The creature circled below, its eyes never leaving us. It let out a sound, a mix of a howl and a roar, that sent chills down my spine. It was calling for something, and I dreaded to think what. Minutes felt like hours as we waited, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. The creature eventually wandered off, but I knew it was still close, waiting for us to come down. We had no choice but to wait, hoping it would lose interest. As dusk approached, the forest began to come alive with the sounds of nocturnal animals. The creature, however, remained silent. Kevin and I exchanged glances, knowing we couldn't stay on the ledge all night. We needed a plan. "We have to make a run for the truck," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's our only chance." Kevin nodded, his face pale but determined. We climbed down as quietly as we could and started moving again. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made my heart race. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees twisting into ominous shapes in the fading light. We were almost there, the truck just visible through the trees when the creature attacked again. It leapt from the shadows, knocking Kevin to the ground. I turned and fired, the shot hitting it square in the chest. This time it howled in pain, but it didn't stop. It lunged at me, its claws ripping through my jacket. I stumbled back, reloading as quickly as I could. Kevin was back on his feet, bleeding but still fighting. He swung his rifle like a club, hitting the creature with all his strength. It snarled and swiped at him, but he managed to dodge, barely. I fired again, aiming for its head. The bullet hit its mark, and the creature fell, thrashing on the ground. It let out one final, ear-piercing scream before going still. Kevin and I stood there, panting, staring at the lifeless body. "Is it dead?" Kevin asked, his voice shaking. "I think so," I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure. We approached cautiously, ready to run if it moved, but it didn't. The creature lay there, a grotesque reminder of the day's events. We didn't waste any more time. We got to the truck and drove out of there, not looking back. The forest that had once been a place of solace and adventure was now tainted by the memory of that creature. Back in town, we reported what had happened to the authorities. They were skeptical, of course, but when they saw the body and the footprints, they had no choice but to take us seriously. The news spread quickly, and soon the area was swarming with researchers and reporters. Kevin and I tried to move on, but the encounter had changed us. We still went hunting, but we were more cautious, more aware of the dangers that lurked in the wild. That day had been a stark reminder that no matter how much we think we know about the world, there are always things out there that can surprise us, things that defy explanation. In the end, we never found out what the creature was or where it had come from. Some things, it seems, are destined to remain mysteries, lurking in the shadows, waiting to be discovered by those brave or foolish enough to seek them out. My name is Liam Campbell, and in the summer of 2009, I found myself in the thick of the Okapi National Wildlife Refuge, right on the Georgia-Florida line. Now, if you've ever been there, you know Okapi has that swampy, steamy vibe that feels like it hasn't changed in centuries. And yeah, It's as fun to trudge through as it sounds. My buddies back in Montana thought I was nuts for signing up for this search and rescue gig out here, especially in a place most folks don't go, even if they're paid to. But when you're pushing 50 and your back ain't quite what it used to be, desk jobs start looking like the last lifeline. I thought this was the perfect blend. Some paperwork, some patrols, nothing too intense, except I was wrong. Way wrong. One August morning, just as the day was heating up, I got a call about a missing man. His wife reported him after he didn't make it back to their RV at one of the designated camping spots near the swamp's edge. Frankly, I figured it was one of those cases where the guy decided to take a longer-than-planned fishing trip, or maybe got a little turned around. Happens a lot. But when I grabbed my gear, I couldn't shake this snagging feeling, like a prickling at the back of my neck. I blamed it on lack of sleep and maybe a slight hangover from the night before. I headed to the swamp with the junior ranger John Alaskan, fresh out of whatever nature program he crawled from, all wide-eyed and eager. As we pushed through the thick underbrush, he kept spouting off stats about Okapi's wildlife, like I'd signed up for a swamp tour. Gators, herons, rattlers. He had facts about them all. Great kid, but enthusiasm wasn't what we needed out here. About an hour in, we found the man's backpack snagged on a tree branch, half submerged in mud. Nothing too alarming, until I saw the way it was hanging, like it had been torn or ripped. The swamp had this eerie quiet about it. It wasn't just the absence of birds or bugs, it was a dead silence that crawled under your skin. I muttered to John to keep his voice down, though I didn't really know why. Guess instinct has a funny way of making itself known when you need it. By noon we were deep into the cypress trees. Spanish moss dripped down like some kind of haunted tinsel, and the place had an otherworldly feeling, like stepping back in time. That's when we saw it, the body, or what was left of it. Half in the water, mangled like a rag doll, and yet somehow not quite lifelike. His face was a mess of scratches, and his shirt, shredded beyond repair, clung to his torso. John went pale. I could see him trying to keep it together, but his breath came short and fast, like he was about to hurl. I wanted to tell him this was the worst of it, that this was the thing we'd tell ghost stories about later, but then I saw the marks. Now, I've seen what gators can do to a person, and this wasn't a gator. Whatever did this to the man had left puncture marks all over his legs and shoulders, too far apart for any known creature in these swamps. It looked like a set of jaws, but there was something off. Like the bite pattern was trying to mimic a crocodile, but bigger, way bigger. And the teeth weren't rounded like a gator's. They were more jagged, like a saw had chewed him up. John had stopped breathing altogether, just staring. I nudged him to snap out of it, reminding him that we needed to report back. We didn't have our radios with us. Signals don't get through most of this area, so we planned to hit one of the nearby ranger stations and call it in. I told John we'd need to document the scene, but he shook his head, mumbling something about this being wrong, that we shouldn't be here. I admit I wasn't keen to stick around either, but protocol's protocol. So I pulled out my camera to snap a few shots. Just as I was focusing, a rustle sounded from behind John, and I froze. I could feel his panic building up like a pressure cooker beside me. We turned around slowly, and that's when we saw it, or part of it. The creature was half submerged in the swamp water, but I could see the top of its skull, a thick, bony ridge that reminded me of an old snapping turtle, only 10 times the size. Its skin was mottled and dark, camouflaging with the muddy water, but when it moved, I saw something that looked like scales. It didn't move fast, more like it was studying us, calculating. I'd never seen anything like it. John whispered something about getting out of there, and I agreed, but I wasn't about to turn my back on this thing. We stepped back slowly, trying to keep our movement smooth. It tracked us, eyes following every step, head slightly tilted like it was waiting. I kept my camera down, afraid the flash might set it off. It was like a standoff, us on the muddy bank, it half hidden in the swamp water. Out of nowhere it lunged forward. Not fast, not charging, just a quick lurch that covered a terrifying amount of ground. It revealed more of itself, a hulking mass bigger than any croc I'd ever seen, but with limbs more suited to dragging through the mud. Its mouth was a gaping cavern, and I swear I caught a whiff of rotten mud. That was enough for John, who bolted like a rabbit. I couldn't blame him, though I wasn't far behind. We tore through the swamp, stumbling over roots and wading through knee-deep water, every nerve screaming to keep moving. But the thing was moving too, a slow but relentless pursuit. I could hear it closing behind us, and there was this low sound, a wet scraping like claws dragging through the muck. We burst onto a small clearing, and I felt a glimmer of hope when I saw one of the old, rickety observation towers made for bird watchers or brave souls who wanted a better view of the swamp. It stood barely taller than the trees, but it was something. I gestured at John, and we climbed, scrambling up the wooden steps as fast as our legs would carry us. The tower shook under our weight, and I half expected it to collapse, but it held. We were maybe 15 feet up when we looked down and saw the creature circling. It glared up at us, that hulking form now fully visible in the dim light filtering through the swamp. Its body was thick, covered in layers of rough, mud-caked skin that looked like armor. It had huge limbs, like it was built for waiting but not running. John kept mumbling to himself, rocking back and forth on the narrow platform. I scanned the swamp, hoping for any sign of rescue, but I knew it was a fool's hope. This place was a dead zone, a quiet void where no one would find us until the next patrol. The thing lunged at the tower, sending a jolt through the wood. It didn't seem able to climb, but it kept ramming its body against the supports, each impact sending a bone-shaking tremor up to where we clung. I thought about pulling out my knife, but what good was that against something that looked like it could snap me in half? After what felt like an eternity, it finally gave up, slinking back into the water, leaving only a trail of broken branches and trampled mud. John and I stayed up there, waiting for the sounds to fade, hearts pounding in sync with the swamp's eerie quiet. Finally, we dared to climb down, legs wobbly, knees buckling with every step. We made it back to the ranger station, silent and shaken, hardly exchanging a word. John's eyes were hollow, like he'd left something out there in the swamp. The rescue team found the man's body, but they dismissed our creature report as a mistaken encounter with an alligator. I didn't argue. No one wants to believe something like that's out there. But late one night, weeks later, I dug through some old files and found a reference to an okapi giant. Old stories, folklore mostly, about something lurking in the swamp that wasn't quite alligator. Not quite anything else either. Maybe some ancient survivor of a forgotten age. We never saw it again, but when I think back to that hot August day in 2009, all I can remember is the sound of it dragging itself through the mud, that hungry, calculating gaze locked on us, and the way it moved. Not fast, but sure. My RV trip to the Grand Canyon was supposed to be a peaceful retreat from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. I've been dealing with a lot lately. Work pressures, family issues, you name it. So when my friend Marvin suggested we take his new RV for a spin, I jumped at the chance. He's always been the adventurous type, and I figured some time in the wilderness would do me good. Marvin picked me up early in the morning, and we set off with the sun rising behind us. His RV was a beauty, fully stocked with everything we'd need for a few days away from civilization. We had fishing gear, a small portable grill, enough food to feed a small army, and most importantly, a couple of six-packs of our favorite beer. Marvin had even brought his shotgun, just in case we encountered any wildlife. It seemed a bit overkill to me, but he insisted it was better to be safe than sorry. We arrived at the Grand Canyon around noon. The view was breathtaking, with the vast expanse of rugged terrain stretching out as far as the eye could see. We found a secluded spot to park the RV, away from the main tourist areas. It was perfect, quiet, serene, and with an unbeatable view. The first day was uneventful. We hiked a bit, fished in the nearby river, and enjoyed a barbecue as the sun set. Marvin was in high spirits, and his infectious enthusiasm soon lifted my mood. As the night fell, we settled in by the campfire, sharing stories and reminiscing about old times. I felt a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in months. The next morning, things took a turn. We decided to explore a little deeper into the canyon. Marvin had found a trail on one of his maps that led to an old abandoned mining site. It sounded interesting, and we both agreed it would make for a fun adventure. We packed some essentials, water, snacks, a flashlight, and set off on foot. The trail was narrow and winding, with steep drops on either side. We moved carefully, using our walking sticks to steady ourselves. Marvin was ahead of me as usual, his boundless energy propelling him forward. The air was cool and crisp, and the only sounds were the crunch of our boots on the gravel and the occasional call of a distant bird. After a couple of hours, we reached the mining site. It was eerie and desolate, with rusted equipment and crumbling structures scattered around. Marvin was fascinated, snapping photos and examining everything closely. I wandered off a bit, drawn to a small cave entrance at the edge of the site. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. "Hey, Marvin, check this out," I called out, shining my flashlight into the cave. The beam of light revealed a narrow tunnel that seemed to go on forever. Marvin joined me, his eyes lighting up with excitement. "Let's go in," he said, already stepping forward. I hesitated. Something about the cave felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. "Are you sure? We don't know how stable it is." "Come on, where's your sense of adventure?" Marvin replied with a grin. "Besides, we've got our flashlights. What's the worst that could happen?" Reluctantly, I followed him inside. The tunnel was damp and cold, the walls closing in around us. We moved slowly, the beams of our flashlights dancing on the rough stone. After a few minutes, we reached a fork in the path. Marvin chose the left tunnel, and we continued on. That's when we heard it, a faint rhythmic sound coming from deeper within the cave. It was almost like drumming. Marvin's eyes widened with curiosity, and he quickened his pace. I struggled to keep up, my unease growing with every step. The tunnel opened up into a larger chamber. In the center, illuminated by our flashlights, was a makeshift camp. There were blankets, cans of food, and even a small fire pit. But what caught my attention was the figure standing at the far end of the chamber, partially hidden in the shadows. "Who's there?" Marvin called out, his voice echoing off the walls. The figure stepped forward, revealing a man in tattered clothes, his face gaunt and eyes wild. He looked like he hadn't seen another human being in years. His eyes locked onto us, and a slow, unsettling smile spread across his face. "Welcome," he said, his voice raspy and broken. "I've been expecting you." Marvin and I exchanged a glance. This was not what we had signed up for. "Who are you?" Marvin asked, taking a cautious step back. The man ignored the question, his smile widening. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his tone almost gleeful now. "You can't leave." Before we could react, he lunged at Marvin, a rusty knife in his hand. Marvin managed to dodge, but the man was fast, unnaturally so. I scrambled for my flashlight, shining it directly in the man's eyes. He recoiled, giving Marvin enough time to pull out his shotgun. "Stay back!" Marvin shouted, aiming the gun at the man. The man froze, his smile never faltering. "You think that will help you?" he taunted. "You're trapped, just like the others." "Others?" The words sent a chill down my spine. I looked around the chamber, noticing for the first time the dark stains on the walls, the scattered bones partially buried in the dirt. We had stumbled into something far more sinister than an abandoned mining site. The man cackled, the sound echoing through the cave. "They all thought they could escape," he said. "But this place, it has a way of keeping you." Marvin fired a warning shot, the blast reverberating through the chamber. The man didn't flinch. Instead, he seemed to feed off the tension, his eyes gleaming with madness. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice shaking now. Marvin nodded, keeping the gun trained on the man as we slowly backed toward the tunnel. The man made no move to follow, his laughter fading as we retreated. We navigated the tunnels as quickly as we could, the sounds of the cave now feeling oppressive and malevolent. When we finally emerged into the daylight, we didn't stop running until we reached the RV. Marvin locked the door, and we both collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. "What the hell was that?" I panted, my mind racing. "I don't know," Marvin replied, his face pale, "but we're not staying to find out." We packed up our camp in record time and left the Grand Canyon behind. The drive back was silent, both of us lost in our thoughts. The experience had shaken us to our core, and the sense of relief we felt upon reaching civilization was palpable. Months later, I still think about that man and his warning. We reported what we saw to the authorities, but they found no trace of the camp or the man. It was like he had vanished into thin air. Marvin and I never spoke of it again, the memory too disturbing to revisit. As I sit here now, back in the comfort of my home, I can't shake the feeling that we narrowly escaped something truly evil. The Grand Canyon holds many secrets, and some are better left undisturbed. My name is Levi Campbell, and I'm 28 years old. I'm a freelance journalist, and, to be honest, a bit of a skeptic when it comes to the supernatural. This happened in October of last year, when I decided to investigate Devil's Hollow, a place near Fort Wayne, Indiana, notorious for its ghost stories and rumors of occult rituals. What I experienced there still haunts me, and it's something I can't explain, at least not in the way I'd like to. I pulled my RV into Devil's Hollow just as the sun was beginning to set. The area lived up to its reputation. Fog rolled lazily across the ground, and the trees loomed over the narrow road like skeletal fingers. My plan was simple: spend a weekend camping in the area, collect notes and photos, and write a story debunking the local legends. I was sure the so-called haunted reputation was just small-town folklore blown out of proportion. The clearing I parked in was eerily quiet. No wind, no rustling leaves, no distant sounds of wildlife, just silence. Atmospheric, I muttered to myself, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. I set up camp quickly, unfolding a chair by the fire pit and arranging my camera gear on the picnic table. The plan was to explore the woods tomorrow and see if I could find any of the symbols or signs mentioned in my research. The trouble started almost immediately. As I settled in, the lights in the RV began to flicker. I checked the generator. It was running fine, but the interior lights continued to pulse erratically, casting unsettling shadows on the walls. Then my camera refused to charge despite being plugged into a fully functional power bank. "Great," I muttered. "Looks like this place is hard on electronics." The first real warning sign came the next morning. I woke early, brewed some coffee, and decided to take a short hike to familiarize myself with the area. I followed a faint trail that wound deeper into the woods, the fog clinging to my legs like damp sheets. About half a mile in, I noticed footprints on the path, barefoot, human-like, but disturbingly large. The prints were fresh, leading away from the trail into the trees. I stopped, staring at them for a long moment. The rational part of my brain told me it was just someone messing around, maybe a local trying to scare campers. Still, the unease in my gut grew stronger. "It's just footprints," I said aloud, my voice sounding hollow in the stillness. I snapped a few pictures and moved on. Back at the campsite, I met Emily. She ran the small general store a few miles down the road and had stopped by to check on me, probably out of curiosity. She was older, maybe in her 50s, with sharp eyes and an air of caution. "You're camping out here alone?" she asked, leaning against her dusty pickup truck. "Yeah," I said, "just doing some research for a story." Emily frowned. "People don't usually stay here long. Devil's Hollow isn't welcoming to strangers." I laughed, trying to lighten the mood. "So I've heard, but I don't scare easy." "You should," she said flatly. "That place remembers everyone who stays too long. Be careful where you step." She hesitated before climbing back into her truck. "And don't go to the hollow itself. Some things are better left alone." Her words stayed with me long after she drove off. That night, things took a turn. As I sat by the fire reviewing my notes, I heard movement in the woods. At first it sounded like branches snapping underfoot, but then it became something else entirely. Whispering. It was faint, almost too quiet to hear, like multiple voices speaking at once. I froze, straining to make out the words, but they were too garbled to understand. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking. The whispers stopped instantly. I stood there for a long moment, scanning the tree line, but saw nothing. Finally, I shook it off and retreated into the RV, locking the door behind me. The flickering lights had returned, casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls. I lay in bed, trying to ignore the feeling that I wasn't alone. At some point, I drifted off. I don't know what woke me, but when I opened my eyes, I saw something in the corner of the room. It was faint, almost like a trick of the light, but it looked like a human figure just standing there, watching me. My breath caught in my throat as I scrambled for the flashlight on my nightstand. When I flicked it on, the figure was gone. The next morning, I found symbols carved into the trees around my campsite. They were crude and angular, like something you'd see in a horror movie. Probably just vandals, I muttered, trying to convince myself, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Desperate for answers, I reviewed the audio recordings I'd made during the night. At first, it was just static, but then I heard it. The whispers. They were clearer now, overlapping voices that repeated the same phrase over and over. When I reversed the audio, the words became clear. The land is bound. Blood must free it. A chill ran down my spine. I wanted to leave, but something about the message made me stay. I needed to understand what was happening. That evening, I ventured deeper into the woods, following a faint path that seemed to lead toward the heart of Devil's Hollow. The fog thickened as I walked, and the air grew colder, heavy with the smell of damp earth. About a mile in, I found a clearing. In the center stood a massive oak tree, its trunk scarred with the same symbols I'd seen earlier. The ground beneath it was blackened, as if burned. As I approached, I felt a pressure in my chest, like something was pushing against me. The whispers started again, louder now, coming from every direction. I turned to leave, but froze when I saw them, shadowy figures emerging from the mist. They were humanoid but wrong, with glowing red eyes that pierced the darkness. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding. The figures didn't move, but their eyes followed me. The pressure in my chest grew stronger, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, they were gone. I ran back to the RV, my mind racing. What were those things, and what did the whispers mean? That night was the worst. The shadowy figures surrounded the RV, their glowing eyes peering through the windows. They pounded on the walls, shaking the entire vehicle. The lights flickered violently, casting erratic shadows that seemed to move on their own. Desperate, I grabbed a knife and carved one of the symbols from the trees into my palm, hoping it would do something. Blood dripped onto the floor as I shouted into the darkness, "What do you want?" The pounding stopped. The shadowy figures retreated, and for a moment there was silence. Then I heard it, a voice, deep and guttural, coming from outside. The pact must be fulfilled. In a moment of desperation, I returned to the clearing with the oak tree. The shadowy figures were waiting for me, their red eyes glowing in the darkness. I knelt beneath the tree and pressed my bloody palm to its blackened roots. "Take it," I whispered. "Take what you want. Just let me go." The figures surrounded me, their whispers growing louder until it felt like my head would split. Then, as quickly as it started, everything went silent. The pressure in my chest lifted and the figures dissolved into the mist. When I returned to the RV, the lights were steady and the engine started on the first try. I left Devil's Hollow that morning, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd left something behind, or that something had followed me. Even now, months later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night to find symbols drawn on my walls or hear faint whispers coming from the shadows. I don't know what I unleashed in Devil's Hollow, but one thing is certain. I'll never go back. This is the kind of place that stays with you. Even if you escape, it finds a way to remind you it's still watching. When you're out RV camping, you think you're just going to relax, maybe catch some fish, grill up some dinner, and enjoy the peace and quiet away from the city. But sometimes things don't go as planned. I should have known when my old RV sputtered and died just 10 miles from the nearest town, but I managed to fix it. At least I thought I did. The campgrounds were nestled deep in the forest of the Pacific Northwest, miles away from the nearest human settlement. Perfect for a getaway, I thought. My name's Owen Marlowe, by the way, and I've always enjoyed the solitude that comes with the wilderness. I've dealt with my share of hardships, including a divorce that left me craving isolation. This trip was supposed to be a break from the chaos. I parked the RV at a secluded spot beside a tranquil lake surrounded by dense trees. The water was clear, reflecting the towering pines and the sky above. It was beautiful, serene, and entirely off the grid. I unpacked, set up a fire pit, and got ready to spend the day fishing. Around mid-afternoon, a guy wandered into my camp. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and his clothes looked like they hadn't seen a washer in a good while. His name was Elias Jarvis. Elias said he was hiking through the area and had lost his way. He seemed friendly enough, although a bit scruffy. I offered him some water and a sandwich, and we got to talking. Elias mentioned he was looking for a place called Devil's Gorge. The name alone should have been a red flag, but I figured it was just some local hiking spot with a dramatic name. He said he was a nature enthusiast, but the more we talked, the more I realized he knew less about the wilderness than he let on. His questions were off, like he was trying to learn more about me than the area. We shared a few beers, and before I knew it, the sun was setting. Elias said he'd camp nearby and find his way to Devil's Gorge in the morning. I nodded, and he wandered off into the trees. Something about him didn't sit right with me, but I brushed it off. Maybe he was just an oddball. That night, I woke up to a noise outside the RV. At first, I thought it was an animal, but then I heard whispers. I crept to the window and peeked out in the dim moonlight. I saw Elias talking to another man. This guy was shorter, stockier, with a shaved head and a thick beard. They were arguing, though I couldn't make out the words. I felt a chill run through me. Why would Elias lie about being lost, and who was this other guy? I decided to confront them. Grabbing my flashlight and the hunting knife I always kept by my bed, I stepped outside, quietly closing the door behind me. "Elias!" I called out, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "What's going on here?" The two men froze, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then Elias turned to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Owen, meet my brother Gary. He found me after we got separated. Sorry if we woke you." Gary gave a nod, but his eyes were cold, assessing. Something was definitely off. "It's fine," I lied. "Just making sure everything's okay." Elias and Gary exchanged a look before Elias said, "Yeah, we're good. Thanks for checking on us." I went back to the RV, but sleep was out of the question. I stayed up, knife in hand, listening for any sounds that might hint at trouble. Hours passed, and nothing happened. Maybe I was overreacting, I thought. The next morning, Elias and Gary were gone, their campsite showing no signs they had ever been there. I decided to pack up and leave, but as I walked around the RV to disconnect the water hookup, I noticed something strange. A small patch of earth near the back had been disturbed. Curious, I knelt down and brushed away the loose dirt. To my horror, I found a human finger, bloody and partially decomposed. My stomach churned, and I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. I had to call the authorities, but my cell phone had no signal out here. I scrambled back into the RV, started the engine, and prayed it would make it to town. Driving down the narrow, winding road, I kept looking in the mirrors, half expecting Elias and Gary to pop out from behind a tree. When I finally reached the town, I headed straight for the sheriff's office. Sheriff Jackman was a no-nonsense type with a grizzled beard and a permanent scowl. I told him everything about Elias, Gary, the argument, and the finger I found. Jackman didn't seem surprised. "You're not the first to report something like this," he said grimly. "There have been a few hikers gone missing in those woods over the past year. We found traces, but nothing concrete until now." He assembled a team, and we headed back to the campsite. The sheriff's deputies scoured the area where I found the finger, and soon uncovered more remains. It was clear this was the work of more than one person. As they expanded the search, they found a shallow grave with the body of a young woman, her face twisted in terror. The sheriff turned to me. "Looks like you stumbled onto something big, Marlowe. We need to find these bastards." The rest of the day was a blur of questioning and searching. They found more evidence. Personal belongings, more bones, and signs of multiple campfires. Elias and Gary were using the remote areas as their hunting ground, preying on unsuspecting campers and hikers. As night fell, the mood grew tense. The sheriff's men were on high alert, scanning the forest with flashlights and keeping their weapons ready. I stayed close to the RV, feeling a mix of fear and anger. How could I have been so naive? Around midnight, a deputy found a trail of footprints leading deeper into the woods. We followed, the air thick with anticipation. The trail ended at an old abandoned cabin, half hidden by the undergrowth. The sheriff signaled for silence, and we approached cautiously. Inside, the cabin was a nightmare. Bloodstains on the floor and makeshift restraints on the walls told a gruesome story. The stench of decay was overpowering. We moved through the rooms, checking for any signs of life. Then we heard it, a faint rustling from the back room. Guns drawn, we burst in, finding Elias and Gary huddled over a map, planning their next move. They looked up, shocked, and in that split second, I saw the madness in their eyes. "Drop the weapons," the sheriff yelled. But instead of complying, Elias lunged at us, a wild look on his face. Shots rang out, and he collapsed, clutching his chest. Gary tried to run, but he didn't get far. A deputy tackled him to the ground, cuffing him before he could react. Elias was dead, but Gary was alive, spitting curses and struggling against the deputies as they dragged him out. He glared at me. "This ain't over," he hissed. "You'll see." The authorities combed the area for more evidence and identified more victims from the belongings found in the cabin. It was clear that Elias and Gary had been at this for a while. The sheriff thanked me for coming forward and assured me that Gary would face justice. I left the campsite the next day, my mind reeling from the ordeal. It was over, but the images of what I'd seen would stay with me forever. As I drove away, I couldn't help but think about the victims and their families. I hoped they would find some peace knowing the killers had been caught. And as for me, I knew I'd never forget the time I went RV camping and uncovered a nightmare in the heart of the forest.